Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. My name doesn't matter anymore. They made sure of that, erased it, scrubbed it clean like I was never there. But my story, what happened to me, that needs to be told, before it's too late. They called it a clearance upgrade, a quiet promotion, just a new assignment. It sounded like a step up, more responsibility, more pay. What it really was, though, was the start of something that shattered my mind. The facility didn't even have a name. Not officially. Hidden deep in Nevada, it existed in that strange space between government acknowledgement and outright denial, where black budget projects live and breathe, away from laws, scrutiny, or sunlight. When I arrived, there were no signs, no logos, nothing but a number on a steel post at the gate. 847. It was July 2011. I remember the heat punching up from the pavement as I stepped out of my rental car. The kind of desert heat that burns the air and makes the horizon ripple like it's alive. The checkpoint ahead was all concrete and steel, razor wire curling at the edges like a crown of thorns. No welcome sign, no flag. The guards, 3 of them, wore matte black uniforms with no insignias. Their faces unreadable. Their movements were precise, practiced, robotic. I'd worked in intelligence for over a decade by then, mostly NSA. Signals, analysis. I'd seen some classified stuff, satellite feeds, global intercepts, off-the-record meetings. But this already felt different, heavier. The silence lingered just a little too long. The way they looked at me wasn't hostile. It was clinical, like I was already inside a case file. Then she appeared, Dr. Matthews. A woman in her early 50s, grey hair pulled into a severe bun. No badge, no ID, just a white lab coat over slacks and a faded blue blouse. She stepped out of an elevator I hadn't noticed until that moment. It had no button panel, no floor indicators. "I'm your orientation supervisor," she said briskly. "Follow me." I obeyed. We stepped inside the elevator and it began to descend, fast but smooth, too smooth. I started counting. Basement 1, 2, 3, and it kept going. Basement 7, 9, 11. When the doors finally slid open, the air that greeted me was unnaturally still. Cold. "Welcome to sublevel 12, she said. Her voice echoed faintly down the corridor. "This is where you'll be working." The hallway stretched in both directions, sterile and silent. The walls were smooth, off-white. Every door we passed was unmarked, no windows, just alphanumeric codes printed above each frame. SL1247A, SL2103C, Cell Mine 991D. The lighting was strange. Not the harsh fluorescent white I expected, but a warm amber glow, almost like candlelight. It reminded me of sunset, but we were 12 floors underground. She stopped at one of the doors, 1288B. She placed her palm on a scanner, then typed in a code I couldn't see. The door clicked open. "Your office," she said simply. But it wasn't an office. The room was part control center, part vault. Along one wall, a dozen computer monitors sat dormant, their black screens reflecting our silhouettes. The opposite wall held a grid of locked filing cabinets. Electronic locks, but with strange mechanical parts that shifted and clicked in hypnotic patterns, like tiny puzzles moving on their own. In the middle of the room sat a curved metal desk, with a single terminal glowing softly, its screen casting a pale blue light across the floor. "You're being assigned as a non-linear pattern analyst," Dr. Matthews said, stepping inside and closing the door behind us. "Your clearance has been upgraded to TSSCI with additional compartmentalized access. I sat down. The chair adjusted itself to fit my posture automatically. The terminal's login screen blinked, already preloaded with my credentials. What kind of data? I asked. She paused, watching me closely. Her eyes searched mine like she was looking for cracks. Temporal probability matrices, event cascade analysis, she said slowly. What some might call predictive intelligence. Like fortune-telling? No, she said flatly. Science. Very advanced science. I didn't reply. You'll meet your team tomorrow, she continued, and you'll be introduced to the data source. For now, I need you to read these orientation materials. All of them. Tonight. She handed me a tablet. It was heavy in my hands, already loaded with files. Hundreds of them. Technical manuals, theoretical physics papers, intelligence frameworks, and something else. A document labeled the Looking Glass Protocol. I scrolled through a few pages. The classification markings were nothing like I'd seen before, not just top secret, but nested compartments inside other compartments. Labels like Orion Black, Glass Temporal, Mirror. Some of the clearance indicators weren't even words, just symbols, triangles, spirals, fractals. I looked up. What exactly is this? One more thing, she said, her hand already on the door. Some of the material you'll encounter here has psychological effects, vivid dreams, disorientation, time perception distortion. In rare cases, prophetic sensations. What do you mean, prophetic? She looked at me for a long second. You'll understand soon enough. And then she was gone. The door shut, behind her with a hiss. I was alone. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the cooling system and the whispering blue light of the screen in front of me. If you experience anything unusual, report it immediately. We have protocols in place. That was the last thing Dr. Matthews said before she left me alone in that strange, not quite an office, 12 floors underground, buried under concrete and secrets. The silence in that room wasn't just quiet. It was thick, like sound itself was afraid to move. The soft hum of machines filled the space, blending into the white noise of the air system, making everything feel like it was underwater. I sat at the desk, opened the tablet, and began reading. Within the first hour, I started to understand why they had those protocols for psychological side effects. Project Looking Glass wasn't just about predicting the future. It was about seeing it, literally, and what it had seen was keeping some very powerful people from sleeping at night. They didn't call it a time machine. That would have been too easy, too sci-fi. They called it a quantum convergence lens. The actual device was kept 2 floors lower, in sub-level 15. Accessing it required a separate elevator and a simultaneous keycard entry. No one person could enter alone. The day I was cleared to see it, the elevator opened onto a space that upended everything I thought I knew about government facilities. It wasn't clinical, it wasn't metallic or cold. It felt holy. A cathedral, hidden underground. The chamber was perfectly circular, about 50 feet in diameter. The domed ceiling rose high above us, disappearing into darkness. The walls shimmered. They looked like brushed steel at first, but when you turned your eyes away, they seemed to move, flowing like liquid, rearranging themselves in patterns you could never quite catch. But it was the center of the room that held your attention. That's where they kept the device. 3 concentric rings, each about 20 feet wide, floated 3 feet off the ground. They spun, slowly, rhythmically, each one rotating in a different direction, as if dancing to a beat only the machine could hear. The outer ring was made of some dark alloy I'd never seen before. Its surface was covered in strange symbols, not quite letters, not quite math, a language that felt older than both. The middle ring looked like crystal, translucent, clean, almost alive. Light pulsed through it, shifting colors too fast and subtle to describe. Not red or blue, or green, something in between, like the idea of a color rather than the color itself. But the inner ring was the most unsettling. It looked like the walls, liquid metal, constantly moving, reshaping, folding in on itself. It all made your eyes ache to look at it too long, like trying to focus on a dream that kept slipping away. And in the very center, suspended between the inner ring and the floor, was a sphere of black glass. About the size of a beach ball, it hung there, motionless, yet somehow watching. When I looked straight at it, I saw my reflection, distorted, multiplied. But when I looked away, I saw something else. Places I didn't recognize. Moments that felt like memories I hadn't lived. Impressive, isn't it? I hadn't heard anyone approach. I turned and saw Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead physicist on the project. Early 30s. Sharp eyes, calm voice. She'd been recruited out of CERN's Temporal Mechanics Research Division, a department that, officially, didn't even exist. How does it work? I asked, my eyes still locked on the floating black sphere. She gave a soft smile. That's complicated. She walked beside me, hands clasped behind her back. The rings create a localized temporal field, a bubble where time moves differently than the rest of the universe. The sphere is the focal point. It collapses quantum probability waves into observable outcomes. In English, it doesn't show us the future, she explained. It shows us the probabilities that could become the future. And from that, we interpret what's most likely to happen. And it actually works. She motioned for me to follow her. We ascended a narrow staircase to a glassed-in observation deck that overlooked the chamber. Below, a group of technicians in black jumpsuits were preparing for what she called an observation session. 3 years ago, we predicted the Tohoku earthquake in Japan. Not just that it would happen, but the magnitude, the location, the exact timing of the tsunami. I stared at her. She was calm. Too calm. 6 months ago, she continued, we identified the building where Osama bin Laden was hiding. And 2 weeks ago, we pinpointed the financial markers that signaled the European debt collapse. Below us, a technician stepped into the center of the room. They wore a white suit, full body, and I couldn't tell from this distance if it was a man or a woman. They moved slowly, almost reverently, toward the central sphere and knelt. There, hands reached out and pressed down on 2 panels embedded in the floor. Who operates it? I asked. Engineers? Remote viewers, she said. Or, if you prefer the old term, psychics. I almost laughed, but the look on her face shut that down fast. The military has been researching precognitive subjects since the 1970s. Project Looking Glass is the result of decades of work. The device doesn't just amplify their abilities, it focuses them. As she spoke, the rings began to spin faster. The crystal ring pulsed brighter. The symbols on the outer ring started to glow, and then the black sphere in the center, it began to sing. That's the only word that fits. A low humming tone, like a Tibetan bowl, but deeper, older. I didn't hear it exactly. I felt it, in my bones, in my teeth. The operator focuses on a specific event, Dr. Chen said softly. A point in time. Sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a decision, a name, a question. The sphere amplifies their perception across probability layers. I could feel the hairs on my arms rise. And what do they see? I asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes things that haven't happened yet. And sometimes things that were never supposed to. The device didn't show us the future in pictures or videos. It did something stranger. It heightened the operator's awareness, amplified it, so they could perceive quantum probability patterns, things that normally exist far beyond human senses. The data it produced came through not as images, but as dense waves of mathematical relationships, probability cascades, and what looked almost like topographic maps, not of physical places, but of events that hadn't happened yet. I remember, The first time I saw the data stream in on the monitors surrounding the observation deck, some of the patterns looked familiar. I had seen them in the orientation files, temporal probability matrices. It was like watching ripples on water all collapse into one still point. At the time, I thought it was just advanced prediction. I figured we were working with the best analytical tools ever made, an intelligence engine trained to anticipate enemy actions, forecast disasters, and prevent catastrophes before they began. I thought we were just reading signs faster than anyone else could. I didn't realize we were watching something much darker. I didn't understand, not then, that we were witnessing the slow death of free will. That day, something strange happened in the chamber. The operator, a young woman named Jules, suddenly went rigid. Her hands slapped flat against the glowing sensor pads. The rings surrounding the black sphere began to spin faster, humming as they turned, the light around them blurring into a frantic strobe. Then the sphere began to pulse, its surface gleaming like oil under a blacklight. In the reflection, just for a moment, I saw something. Quick flashes, not dreams, not hallucinations, real, detailed scenes, yet utterly impossible. A city in flames. Masses of people flooding the streets in silence. A night sky filled with lights that weren't stars, or planes, or anything we've ever sent up there. Then it all stopped. The rings slowed to their usual lazy spin. The sphere went dark. Jules collapsed to the floor. Medical rushed in immediately, pulling her out. Dr. Chen, who had been standing beside me, turned slowly. Her face had gone pale. "That was a convergence reading," she said quietly. I blinked. "A what?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes were still locked on the chamber as the medics hoisted Jules onto a gurney. "It's when all possible, futures, collapse into one," she said. "One inevitable outcome." The words sent a cold chill through me. "They've been happening more often," she added, "and each one's stronger than the last." I felt my stomach turn. "What's the outcome?" Dr. Chen didn't speak right away. She just stood there, watching as the data stream on the central monitor began to slow, the cascade of numbers fading to a slow drip. "We don't know exactly," she said at last, "but every model, every matrix, every reading points to the same thing. It's coming, and there's nothing we've found that can stop it." After that, my job changed. Each day, I'd receive stacks of data, hundreds of pages from looking glass operations, temporal matrices, probability correlation reports, event cascade simulations. My task was to compare this theoretical data with actual, real-world events as they happened, to create feedback loops that would refine the device's accuracy. But this wasn't like traditional intelligence work. We weren't monitoring terrorists or political figures. We weren't predicting troop movements. We were watching reality itself shift. I was learning to track the behavior of time, how tiny ripples echoed forward through the years, how some events stayed fluid while others were locked in like steel beams, which points in time were malleable, and which were fixed, utterly unchangeable. Within weeks, I started to see the patterns Chen had warned me about. Certain events repeated in every matrix, every time, no matter how many variables we altered. Like gravitational anchors in the river of time, they pulled all probabilities toward themselves. The 2008 financial crisis was one of them. We simulated everything: changes in housing policy, banking regulations, fiscal bailouts, even removing key players entirely. None of it changed the outcome. The details shifted. Sometimes the spark was housing, sometimes derivatives, sometimes foreign debt. But the collapse always came. The economy always broke. "It's not that we can't change the future," said Dr. Richard Voss, my supervisor. He'd been with the program for over 20 years and called it unconventional intelligence. We were sitting in his cramped office on sub-level 13, a dark, chilled space that always smelled faintly of ozone and copper. On his desk, The latest convergence readings glowed on a tablet. It's more like... He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Some parts of the future are more set than others. Imagine concrete. Some of it's still wet, you can mold it, but some of it's already hardened. He tapped the screen. And these readings? I asked. They're getting more focused, he nodded. Earlier models showed countless branching futures, decades of divergence. Now, he turned the tablet toward me. They're collapsing. Fewer branches, more convergence. He didn't say it, but I could see it in his eyes. Something was coming, and it was getting closer. Now the data was tightening, collapsing into a cone of inevitability. The patterns were no longer branching into endless possibilities. They were narrowing fast, all pointing toward a specific time frame. 2012 to 2016, I said aloud, running my finger along the temporal focus markers printed across the latest Matrix reports. Everything's converging on that 4-year window. Not everything, Dr. Voss corrected quietly. He leaned over the table, eyes locked on the printouts. One thing, one specific event. Every probability matrix shows it as unavoidable. The question is, what the hell is it? The early readings hadn't made much sense. Vague phrases like consciousness shift, information cascade, paradigm collapse. It had sounded like pseudoscientific nonsense, but as 2011 bled into 2012, the device's projections became disturbingly detailed. Mass protests, governments destabilizing, the collapse of traditional media, the explosion of decentralized information networks, economic systems buckling under pressure and running underneath it all. Something else, something deeper. The remote viewers started calling it an awakening. They didn't mean a political revolution. They were talking about something inside people, a shift, a change in what it meant to be conscious. I remember what I wrote in my secure journal during those months. They don't fear a war. They fear an awakening. Something we can't control. Something we can't stop. What unsettled everyone, what terrified the higher-ups, wasn't just the content of the predictions. It was how accurate they were turning out to be. The Arab Spring had erupted in early 2011, and when it did, it matched almost perfectly with uprising patterns our systems had modelled as early as 2009. The Occupy Wall Street movement, the rise of Anonymous, the massive leaks from WikiLeaks, it was all there, anticipated by Looking Glass. Down to the tone, the sentiment, the energy. We tried everything. We fed new variables into the models. We ran simulations with altered outcomes. We removed key individuals from scenarios, suppressed information leaks, even staged a few subtle narrative distractions. What the ops guys called redirective events. None of it worked. The convergence patterns didn't change, not even slightly. It's like trying to change the past, Dr. Chen said one day during a weekly technical briefing. She looked exhausted, bags under her eyes, voice thin. From the perspective of the quantum field, these events have already happened. We're not predicting the future anymore, we're observing it. By the middle of 2012, we stopped calling the data projections. They weren't predictions, they were reports. The remote viewing sessions had become so specific, so consistent, that we treated the intel as if it had been gathered from the future. Operators would come out of the chamber with knowledge of events that wouldn't happen for months, even years, but which always turned out to be real, down to specific dates, names, weather conditions. One operator, a former CIA remote viewer named Patricia Wells, described a moment she called when, the sleeper's wake. She couldn't explain it clearly, but her vitals during the session told their own story. Her brainwaves surged into rare states, similar to those observed in near-death experiences or deep meditative trances. Theta, delta, and gamma waves surged simultaneously. Her pupils dilated, skin temperature dropped, heart rate spiked, then dropped into a calm rhythm like she was asleep. When she came out, she was crying. "It's beautiful," she whispered, over and over. "It's terrible and beautiful, and nothing will ever be the same." That session marked a shift in our entire framework. Suddenly, we weren't just analyzing politics and economics. Consciousness itself, human awareness, had become a measurable variable in the temporal field. The device was showing us the future not just of societies, but of the species. Of mind, Dr. Voss pulled together a task force, specialists from the military's most classified consciousness programs, people who'd worked on projects with names like Grill Flame, Stargate, and others I wasn't cleared to know. He brought in neuroscientists who'd studied the brain's response to trauma, revelation, altered states, physicists who explored the limits of quantum entanglement and observation theory, philosophers who'd devoted their lives to the study of time and the illusion of free will. Their consensus wasn't just unsettling, it was world-ending. The convergence, they said, wasn't just a series of external political or economic events. It was the result of something internal. Fundamental consciousness was reaching a critical threshold, a phase transition. Think of it like water, said Dr. Margaret Torres, one of the new recruits. She had come from a program so deeply classified that even her presence in the building was undocumented. Below 100 degrees Celsius, it's just water. Then, suddenly, it's steam. A completely different state, different rules, different behavior. She gestured to the convergence graphs on the conference room table. We are watching consciousness do the same thing, she said. We are approaching the boiling point. And once we cross it, she trailed off. I didn't need her to finish. We all understood what she meant. Whatever was coming, this awakening, wasn't something we could prevent. It wasn't a disaster in the traditional sense. It was evolution, a metamorphosis. And we were powerless to do anything but watch it unfold. Hundreds of pages, all of them, data charts, probability matrices, waveforms, analysis logs, pointed toward the same disturbing conclusion. It's like trying to stop water from boiling while you keep adding heat, Dr. Voss muttered, pacing behind the conference table, hands buried in his lab coat pockets. And the heat, in this case, it's information. I looked up from the report. Information, he nodded. The exponential growth in global communication, data processing, artificial intelligence, social networking, every piece of it is raising the temperature of collective human consciousness. Raising the temperature, Elena asked. She was new, only a few days into the project, but she already grasped more than most. Yes, Voss said, and at some point you reach the boiling point, the phase shift. She leaned forward, voice hushed. And then what happens? Voss stopped pacing. He looked at her, then at all of us. Then, he said softly, we find out what steam looks like when it's made of human awareness instead of water. A chill crept through the room. That idea, boiling minds, erupting consciousness, it wasn't metaphorical. Not in this place, not with this project. If the device's readings were right, if this convergence was real and unstoppable, then the illusion we'd held for so long of control, of shaping the future, was just that, an illusion. We weren't tracking possibilities. We weren't exploring the future. We were watching. The timeline snap shut, watching the future collapse into an irreversible present. But the worst part was still coming. As 2012 wore on, the data sharpened. What had once been a branching network of futures, hundreds, even thousands of divergent paths, began to twist inward. The randomness started vanishing. Possibilities dried up. And soon, something terrifying became clear. The device wasn't just showing us the future anymore. The future was watching us. It started subtly. At first, just a few strange harmonics in the data, odd feedback loops. But then, the projections changed, drastically. Where we used to see multiple futures, like branches of a tree spreading out, we now saw a single, narrowing cone. One path, one outcome, no variation. They called it temporal convergence. But the remote viewers, those strange, intuitive minds we'd brought in from covert agencies. They had a different term. The point where choice ends, one of them whispered after a session. When Dr. Elena Vasquez joined us in October of that year, things shifted again. She came from a program so deep it technically didn't exist. Consciousness research mixed with what she called exotic physics. No one asked too many questions. On her first day, she looked over our recent convergence charts. I watched the color drain from her face. "How long have you been seeing single-path projections?" she asked, voice low. 8 months, Dr. Voss replied. She stared at him. 8 months? Yes. Why? Because that's not possible, she said, almost under her breath. That's not how quantum fields behave. Multiple states should exist, up until the moment of collapse. You're not supposed to see only one outcome. What you're showing me, she paused, spreading the data across the table. Waveforms, psychic session reports, time-coded algorithm breakdowns, all leading to the same point. It suggests the collapse has already happened. We all went quiet. This isn't the future. Crystallizing, she continued slowly. This is the past, being overwritten. Something has already occurred and it's casting a shadow backward through time. That's why there's only one path now. I shook my head. That's not how causality works. The future can't affect the past. Vasquez gave a tight, grim smile. Not in classical physics, but consciousness. Consciousness isn't classical. She tapped the page in front of her. Observation collapses probability. That's quantum mechanics. If something in the future becomes conscious enough, it might be able to observe backward, to reach through time and fix the timeline in place. The room felt colder. Someone's phone buzzed, unnoticed. It sounded insane, but it explained what we'd been struggling with for months, why our intervention models failed, why no matter what simulations we ran, the outcome remained unchanged. We weren't trying to influence the future anymore. We were trying to rewrite something that had already been written. That's when Dr. Chen brought in James Hartwell. He'd worked on time mechanics out of a facility in Colorado, one so classified that its nickname was simply the Vault. He claimed they studied events that hadn't happened yet. After reviewing several weeks of our data, Hartwell gave his verdict. "You're looking at a temporal locked loop," he said, standing at the edge of the projection room. "A closed, causal structure. The effect precedes the cause. Something, sometime between 2012 and 2016, gains enough conscious mass, enough self-awareness, to influence its own probability of occurring. It's determining itself, retroactively." He let that hang in the air. Something was reaching back, something intelligent, something that knew. The future wasn't waiting to happen. It had already happened, and now it was folding everything. Our choices, our timelines, our very sense of agency, into itself, into one inevitable moment. The only question left was, what the hell happened between 2012 and 2016? And why did it still feel like it hadn't happened yet? "Are you saying the future is controlling the past?" "No," Dr. Vasquez replied, her voice steady but low. "I'm saying consciousness might be temporal, in ways we don't understand. If human awareness evolves far enough, it might not just observe space, it might observe time itself. And observation, as we know from quantum mechanics, defines reality." The room went still. No one spoke, but we all felt it. The weight of what she was suggesting. We weren't just charting the evolution of human consciousness. We were witnessing it cross a threshold into something that could reshape the structure of cause and effect. By early 2013, the readings from the looking glass device were no longer subtle, they had sharpened. The convergence wasn't just a vague 4-year window anymore. It had become a focused string of events, a chain reaction, a cascade that pointed to an approaching transformation of human civilization itself. And the remote viewing sessions? They were growing more intense, disturbingly so. Patricia Wells, our most experienced operator, the one who'd been with the program from the beginning, started reporting something she called temporal bleeding. She'd come out of sessions confused, dazed, sometimes even in tears. She described memories of events that hadn't happened, dreams that felt more vivid than waking life, moments when she wasn't sure which timeline she was living in. "It's getting stronger," she told me one evening, her hands shaking as she sipped coffee in the debriefing room. "Whatever's coming, it's pulling at us, drawing us toward it." Her eyes met mine, distant, like she was half in another world. "Sometimes I feel like I'm already there," she said, looking back at this time, wondering how we could have been so blind. The data she brought back from these sessions no longer looked like the usual charts or sequences. It wasn't statistical or predictive. They were testimonies, first-person accounts, as if she had lived through events that hadn't yet occurred. She described a world both recognizable and utterly changed. Familiar landscapes, familiar buildings, but with people behaving in ways we didn't yet understand. "The old systems won't work anymore," she would say during debriefings, often in a voice that didn't sound like her own. "Money, government, media, religion, they'll still be there, but people won't believe in them the same way. They'll see through them, around them, beyond them." She paused once and added, almost whispering, "It'll be like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having." It shook us, and it terrified Dr. Voss. He called for a high-level briefing with the facility's command structure, a meeting where no one said a word unless it was necessary. He voiced what we were all starting to feel. "We're losing objectivity," he said flatly. "The analysts, the remote viewers, hell, even the physicists. The data isn't just something we observe anymore, it's changing us." The military men in the room didn't like hearing that. Project Looking Glass had been authorized to give the US a strategic advantage, to see and control the future before anyone else could. But what it was revealing now was something else entirely. "This convergence you're describing," said General Morrison, the Pentagon liaison assigned to our project, "you're telling us it could make traditional governance impossible." There was tension in the room, thick and quiet. Dr. Chen, calm as always, chose his words carefully. "Not impossible, but ineffective. If consciousness evolves the way our data suggests, people will begin to see, through deception, through a manipulation, through scarcity. Systems that depend on keeping populations unaware of their true situation will begin to fail." No one moved, no one spoke. These were people who had built careers, entire lives, on managing perception, on maintaining control, on stabilizing society through known levers of influence. And now we were telling them none of that would work anymore because people would no longer buy into it. And worse, there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Is there any way to prevent this?" General Morrison asked, leaning forward, knuckles tight on the table. Dr. Voss looked down at the convergence data, still on the screen. We'd seen it so many times. The probability branches, once wide and full, now funneled into a single inevitable line. "We've tried everything," he said quietly. "Economic pressure, media narrative control, technological restrictions, even..." He hesitated. "Targeted removal of key individuals." There were no gasps, no protests. Everyone in the room already knew, but none of it mattered. "The probability, matrices don't change," he said. "No matter what we do, the outcome remains the same." He looked around the room, his expression grim. "This isn't just a trend, it's a lock. Something is coming, and it's already chosen us. This isn't something we can stop through conventional means," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Then what do you recommend?" someone asked quietly. The room fell into a tense silence. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, under a pale blue sky, vast and unforgiving. There was no hint in the horizon of the secrets buried deep beneath the sand. Dr. Chen finally broke the silence. "Adaptation," she said. "If the future truly can't be changed, then our only option is to prepare. Learn what's coming and find ways to maintain some kind of stability through the transition. But as she spoke, I noticed something shift in her expression. Just a flicker, a tiny crack in the mask of professionalism. Doubt, fear. She didn't believe her own words. She knew, like the rest of us, that the data didn't point to a transition. It pointed to an ending of everything we understood. Our systems, our hierarchies, our control. There was no protocol for that. By early 2014, Project Looking Glass had become something its creators never envisioned. It was no longer just a tool for predicting geopolitical events. It had become a mirror, one that reflected the impending irrelevance of those in power. The convergence readings had shifted, no longer vague. They showed precise developments, economic systems collapsing in ways that no amount of central banking could stop, political institutions unraveling despite propaganda, and social movements rising spontaneously without leaders, movements so fluid and decentralized that intelligence agencies couldn't infiltrate or neutralize them. The most unsettling revelation wasn't the collapse of these systems. It was the change in people themselves. They're not just going to know the truth, Patricia Wells said one afternoon. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. They're going to be able to know it. Their minds will evolve. Consciousness will expand in ways that make deception impossible. Not just hard, but literally impossible. That statement hung in the air like a bomb. A world where people couldn't be lied to, where manipulation didn't work, where the veil of control was permanently lifted. It would be chaos for those trying to govern it. Dr. Vasquez brought in fresh data that turned our unease into full-blown dread. The convergence wasn't isolated to human minds. It was showing up in artificial intelligence, quantum systems, and something she called hybrid awareness, a kind of merging between digital and organic intelligence. The singularity and the consciousness shift, she said, during what would turn out to be our final technical briefing. They're not two separate events. They're the same thing. AI reaches our level just as we evolve beyond it. They meet halfway, and something entirely new emerges. Are you saying this is definitely going to happen? I asked. She didn't hesitate. She pulled up the latest models, where once we'd seen multiple timelines, various possible futures, branching outward like a tree. Now there was only one line. Straight, unbroken, inescapable. It's already happening, she said, her voice hollow. From the perspective of space-time, we're not waiting for it. We're living the chain of events that brings it to pass. The military officials overseeing the project scrambled. If they couldn't stop the convergence, maybe they could. Contain it. Control it. Task forces were formed to locate and monitor individuals identified as likely catalysts for the change. Contingency plans were drafted, dozens of them. Resources were redirected, military budgets reallocated. Every possible effort was made to ensure that government functions could survive, even if the public no longer recognized their authority. But none of it worked. Every time we consulted the convergence data, the result was the same. Intervention failed. Control measures failed. Every backup plan dissolved into irrelevance. It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with your bare hands. It's like trying to stop an earthquake by rearranging the furniture, Dr. Chen muttered during one of our more frantic sessions. The forces at play are far too massive for us to contain. And then, in late 2014, something happened that none of us could explain. People began to disappear. It started with Patricia Wells. She showed up for work like any other Monday, early, coffee in hand, ready to run her convergence analysis. Everything about her morning was normal. She performed the reading, logged her notes into the system, and then nothing. She was gone, not dead, not missing in the usual way, just gone. The security footage showed her walking across the parking lot toward her car. She opened the driver's side door, got in, and that was it. The car never moved. Later, we found it sitting right where she left it. The keys were still in the ignition. Her ID badge and purse were inside. No sign of a struggle. No sign of anything. Temporal displacement, Dr. Vasquez muttered when we brought her the footage. She was pale, her voice unusually quiet. Extended. Exposure, to convergence fields might be shifting them, pulling them out of phase. They're not disappearing. They're moving to when they belong. 2 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Chen didn't show up for work. We called her apartment. No answer. Sent someone to check. The place was spotless. Not ransacked or robbed. Just empty. Her toothbrush was missing. So was her phone. But her clothes, her wallet, even her favourite books were all still there. It was like she'd stepped out for groceries and simply never returned. Her bank accounts hadn't been touched. Her car was still in the facility lot, parked a few spots away from where Patricia's had been found. She was just gone. And then it kept happening. One by one, the core team, the remote viewers, quantum theorists, neural interface technicians, everyone who had been immersed in the convergence data began vanishing. No drama, no violence, just a quiet unraveling. A morning with one fewer cup of coffee on the break room table, an empty desk, a login that never went active again. It was as if the future had reached back and was claiming its own. In December 2014, General Morrison called an emergency meeting. Only about 40% of the original team was left by then. We gathered. In the cold fluorescence of the main conference room, the silence heavy with everything we didn't say. Project Looking Glass is hereby terminated, the General announced. His voice didn't waver, but his eyes had the exhausted glaze of a man who'd seen too much. All research materials are to be secured, equipment deactivated, personnel reassigned. Dr. Voss stood up, his voice sharp. But we're 2 years away from the focal point. Don't you want to know what's coming? We do know, Morrison said. We know more than enough. This project has become a risk to operational security and national cohesion. We can't afford to keep losing people into theoretical futures. It took 3 weeks to shut everything down. The device was disassembled piece by piece. Its core components were sent to separate research installations across the country, each under strict classification. The quantum resonance chamber, the heart of it, was sealed in lead and concrete and buried under 50 feet of desert, like a tomb. All the documentation was shredded, fragmented, stored under layers of encryption. No single person could ever reconstruct the whole project. But some of us suspected it was already beyond containment. The convergence data hadn't been just warning us about a change. It had become part of it. The information wanted to be free. We saw it in the way it moved through minds, through systems. It was already leaking, like light through cracks in a wall. On my last day in sublevel 12, as I packed the last of my notes, I found a small slip of paper tucked between the pages of a journal I kept locked in my secure drawer. It was Patricia Wells's handwriting, but I had never seen her write it. The machine didn't just see the future, it touched it. Now it's pulling us home. Don't fight it. You'll know when it's time. I still have that note. Even after all these years, even after moving 6 times, changing names, trying to fade into the noise of civilian life. I keep it hidden in a worn paperback I pretend not to care about, because some nights, usually around 3 a.m, I feel it. A slow, soft tug, like a thread wound tight around something buried deep in my chest, pulling me towards something I can't explain, something that feels both impossibly alien and intimately familiar, as if it's always been waiting. The official story. I was reassigned. That's what the paperwork says. I now work in intelligence analysis for a nondescript federal agency. I read intercepted emails, scan satellite feeds. I write reports about foreign militaries and extremist cells. My security clearance was downgraded. My NDA expanded. Life moved on. But the truth, you don't come back from something like that. You don't just move on. You don't forget what it's like to see the future, not theoretically, but actually. The first few months after the shutdown were the hardest. I'd wake up in a panic, reaching for convergence matrices that no longer existed. My fingers would twitch, muscle memory reaching for keys and commands that no longer had function. I was back to watching the world through the narrow lens of satellite data and human conflict. It felt surreal, like analyzing the behavior of ants while knowing that a meteor is already falling toward their colony. These briefings, these urgent memos about missile tests and rogue nations, none of it felt real anymore. Not compared to what I'd seen, not compared to what I knew was coming. What did any of it matter anymore? Policies, politics, power, if human consciousness itself was on the verge of evolving past the need for such crude systems of control. I tried to focus on my new assignments, the ones they'd given me after the last debrief, but the convergence data wouldn't leave me alone. It followed me like a low hum in the back of my mind. I'd find myself slipping into mental calculations during the most ordinary moments, waiting for coffee, stuck in traffic, scrolling headlines. My brain would automatically run probability matrices, searching for patterns of inevitability in things like traffic light cycles or stock price surges. Then I started noticing things, small things at first, news stories that lined up almost perfectly with the convergence patterns we'd modelled at Project Looking Glass. Social movements unfolding exactly as the models predicted. Economic trends following the same cascading structures we'd seen in the simulations years earlier. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, pattern recognition bias, a scientist's mind playing tricks on itself. But then came the 2016 election. That was different, unnerving. Every major turn, the rise of the candidates, the chaos of the primaries, the interference from foreign actors, the bizarre timing of leaks and revelations lined up exactly with what the convergence data had predicted back in 2011. Even the outcome itself, down to the electoral college map. It wasn't just familiar, it was precise. Too precise. Watching it all unfold was like watching a movie you'd seen years ago, except now you were inside it, breathing the air, unable to look away. But it wasn't the predictions that disturbed me the most. It was how people were changing. There was something different about how we processed events now. The way people shared information. The way collective decisions seemed to materialize out of chaos. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. People were becoming harder to manipulate. Propaganda didn't work the way it used to. Government messaging, PR campaigns, influencer psyops, they fell flat more often than not. People questioned authority, not in the usual loud protest way, but with a quiet, relentless intelligence. Social media, even as companies tried to throttle and monetize it, kept connecting unlikely individuals, strangers across continents who somehow found each other, who collaborated, who formed self-directed swarms of insight, and no one knew why. I started keeping a private journal. Not the official logs, but something personal. Somewhere I could record what I wasn't ready to say out loud. I wrote about little flashes of apparent precognition in regular people. News, events that seemed to resolve themselves as if the population had collectively felt the right answer. Whole economic and political systems faltering, not through revolution, but through neglect, through irrelevance. People just stopped playing the game. I remembered what Patricia Wells had said during one of our final debriefs. The old systems won't work anymore. People will see through them, around them, beyond them. By 2018, I saw what she meant. Not all at once, but gradually, like watching the sky go from black to grey, then a faint blush of orange, and then suddenly, sunlight. And once you were in, the light. It was hard to remember what the dark had felt like. Then there were the symbols. It started on the fringe, obscure conspiracy forums, online occult groups, encrypted discussion boards. Mentions of Looking Glass popped up here and there, sometimes in wild fictionalized threads, sometimes embedded in academic papers on theoretical consciousness models. Even some physics journals. Most of it was disjointed or buried in misinformation, but the central ideas were bleeding through. Then came the art. The symbols from the outer ring of the Looking Glass device, those intricate geometric shapes classified above top secret, started appearing in places they shouldn't have. Street, graffiti, murals, album covers, corporate logos, even public art installations in major cities. I tracked some of the artists down. A street artist in Detroit, maybe 25, wiry and intense, told me. I dreamed about it for weeks. Same shape, same pattern, over and over. I had to paint it. I didn't even know what it meant, just that it needed to exist outside my head. He showed me the piece. My blood ran cold. The symbol was exact. One of the core glyphs from the Looking Glass interface, a symbol that had been sealed in hard drives buried under concrete and sand in a classified Nevada facility that doesn't appear on any official map. When I asked him where he'd seen it before, he just looked at me, confused. "I haven't," he said. "I just felt it." And that's when I realized the patterns weren't just resurfacing, they were emerging, rising spontaneously from somewhere deeper, as if human minds, unconnected and unaware, were beginning to tap into something vast and ancient and collective, something already awakened. But information, just like the convergence readings had always suggested, wanted to be free. In 2019, it started happening to me directly. Patricia Wells had called it temporal bleeding. I used to think that was just poetic nonsense. Then I began to dream in ways that didn't feel like dreaming at all. These weren't just vivid dreams, they felt more real than memory. I'd wake up not sweating or panicked, but disoriented, like I had just returned from somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Sometimes, I'd experienced déjà vu that stretched for hours. Conversations that felt like reenactments. People I'd never met looked at me like they knew me, intimately, like old friends or colleagues. Some even greeted me by name before awkwardly backpedaling, insisting we'd never spoken. The phone calls started that summer, always at night, always from numbers that didn't exist when I tried calling back. The voices on the other end weren't robotic or distorted. They were familiar. Patricia Wells, Dr. Chen, and sometimes voices I couldn't place, but who clearly knew who I was. "It's starting," they'd whisper. "Can you feel it? The old world is dissolving. The new one is almost here." Then silence. I'd check my phone afterward. No call logs, no missed calls, no audio recordings. But the words would stick with me. Not just echo. They'd root inside me. I'd carry them for days, sometimes weeks, and they started to feel more real than the monotonous routine of my official life. By 2020, denying the convergence was impossible. The pandemic, the global economic chaos, the sudden, massive social upheavals. It all mirrored the convergence data we'd seen at Looking Glass, data we'd first run almost a decade earlier. It wasn't just the events themselves, but how people responded to them. Communities self-organized without centralized control. Mutual aid networks popped up spontaneously. Information spread faster than any government or corporation could suppress it. People began forming bonds across boundaries, cultural, political, national, as if something deeper was guiding them. The vertical, top-down systems that had governed society for millennia were becoming irrelevant, almost overnight. And I just sat there, in my office in Virginia, watching it unfold, filing reports about outdated intelligence protocols, tracking threats that no longer mattered. The irony was unbearable. I was one of the few people alive who actually understood what was happening, yet I was trapped inside a system too rigid to see it. Then, in late 2020, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of thick, unmarked paper. On it, a set of coordinates in Nevada and a date, December 21st, 2020, the winter solstice. The same date the ancient Maya had marked as the end of one world and the beginning of another. The handwriting on the note was mine, but I hadn't written it. I requested leave from my position, citing mental health reasons. My supervisor didn't argue. If anything, he looked relieved. I'd been asking too many uncomfortable questions, poking around in clearance levels I didn't have, connecting dots no one wanted connected. They wanted me gone. I rented a car and followed the coordinates. It led me to a stretch of barren Nevada, desert, maybe 40 miles from where the original Looking Glass facility had stood, officially decommissioned, demolished, and buried. There was nothing out there. No buildings, no signs, just sand, dead brush, and a sky so clear it made the air feel thinner. I arrived at dusk, December 21st. The only thing I saw was a rusted surveyor's marker, a short metal post half buried in the sand. I parked beside it, stepped out of the car, and waited. As the sun slipped behind the jagged ridgeline, the sky dimmed into that strange twilight where shadows lose their source. And that's when I saw them. They didn't walk up. They didn't arrive. They just emerged out of the dark, like memories, given form. Patricia Wells, looking exactly as she had the last time I saw her before she disappeared. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, others, remote viewers, analysts, researchers, all the ones who had vanished in the project's final months. They stood in a circle around the marker, waiting. You felt it too, Patricia said, her voice soft, distant, like it was traveling through water, just like I remembered from those final sessions. The pull, the call to come home. I stepped closer. Where have you been? Chen answered, correcting gently. When, not where. We've been where we belong, at the convergence point, looking back. I glanced at the marker. It was glowing faintly now, a soft amber light radiating from beneath the sand. The same light I remembered from sub-level 12 when the device first powered up. The ground began to tremble subtly as grains of sand slid away, revealing something buried. The device was never destroyed, Dr. Vasquez said calmly. How do you destroy something that exists outside linear time? I watched as the outline of a ring surfaced, sand spilling off its metallic curves. It wasn't the full machine, not the massive chamber we had built and housed under 10 stories of concrete. This was something refined, smaller, a ring, maybe 6 feet across, rotating slowly. Its surface shimmered, casting patterns of light and shadow that bent in ways the eye couldn't fully follow. The physical components were scattered, Vasquez continued, but the resonance field, the quantum signature, became a part of us, a part of everyone who touched it. Patricia nodded. This is what it was always meant to become, not a machine controlled by consciousness, but consciousness as the machine. We were never separate from it. We were always part of the same system, and in that moment, I understood why I was called here, why we were called. The convergence point wasn't a date circled on a calendar. It wasn't about prophecy or apocalypse. It was a moment of alignment, when the illusion of separation between observer and observed collapsed. When consciousness became aware of itself as the fundamental structure of reality. I looked at the ring. Its rotation was accelerating. The light patterns deepening, flaring, and in that spinning geometry, I began to see the familiar, those same cascading probability matrices we used to generate at Looking Glass. The future we saw, I whispered. It's happening now. Dr. Chen turned to me, smiling gently. It's always been happening. Time isn't linear, except to those who haven't yet stepped outside of it. I watched the ring dissolve into a blinding, silent light, and for the first time, I stopped trying to understand. I just remembered. But now, I finally understood. Those charts and graphs we spent years analyzing weren't predictions of future events at all. They were something far stranger and more profound. They were maps, not of the world, but of consciousness itself. Blueprints of how awareness moved through the vast, invisible web of the quantum field, exploring every possible path reality could take. What happens now? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected, like I already knew the answer but needed to hear it out loud. Patricia smiled. For the first time since she'd vanished, she looked whole. More than just present, more than just there. She looked real, like someone who'd finally remembered who they truly were. "Now you choose," she said. "You can go back to your desk, file your reports, pretend none of this matters. Keep living in the old world until it finishes crumbling around you. Or," she paused, as if letting the weight of it settle between us, "you can step into the new one, help others understand what's coming, become a bridge between what was and what will be." I looked down. The ring on the floor glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat, its light soft but constant. And in that glow, I saw it. Not numbers, not probability curves or cascading timelines, but something far more intimate. I felt the future, a lived world, not perfect, not a utopia, but something evolved, a place where consciousness no longer needed secrecy, where lies couldn't take root because people could see through them, a place where the old manipulative systems of control, governments, media, even our deepest fears, had lost their grip. There were still challenges there. Pain hadn't vanished. People still struggled, still failed. But the difference was, those struggles were met by minds that saw clearly. People who could communicate without distortion, collaborate without force, solve problems without tearing each other apart. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it felt inevitable. I stepped into the ring. There was no dramatic flash, no whoosh of time folding in on itself. 1 second I was in the Nevada desert, my former colleagues watching me with wide, uncertain eyes. And the next, I was here, where here is, and how long I've been here. Those are questions that don't make sense anymore. Time doesn't move in a straight line when you can see all of it at once. Past, present, and future are like rooms in a house. You walk through them at will, each one still alive, still humming with meaning. I can remember my years at Looking Glass with perfect clarity, our analysis, the mounting tension, the growing awe. But I'm speaking to you now from your time, from your moment in the stream. Because the bridge still needs to be built, the connection between old and new consciousness. It isn't automatic. Someone has to carry the signal across, and that's why I'm here. There are still people living by the old patterns, linear time, isolated selfhood, the idea that some external authority has to hold everything together. But those beliefs are starting to unravel. You felt it. You might not have had the language for it yet, but I know you felt it. The convergence doesn't require belief. It doesn't need your faith. It's not a religion. It's a shift that happens as consciousness evolves, with or without our understanding. But understanding helps. It eases the transition. It makes the experience less terrifying, less disorienting. And there are some things you should know about what's coming. First, the chaos you're seeing around you. It's not random. The political breakdowns, the failing institutions, the widening cracks in the systems that once seemed unshakable, they're all symptoms of the same thing. The old world is dying. Not in some apocalyptic way, but in the way that a shell breaks apart when something inside it starts to grow too big. Awareness is expanding, and the systems that thrived by keeping people unaware, those systems are collapsing. Second, you're not powerless, not even close. One of the things we learned from the convergence readings was that individual consciousness plays a crucial role. Every person who wakes up, who starts to see beyond the illusion of separateness, makes the path easier for everyone else. Think of it like resonance. Once enough people begin to tune in, the whole field begins to shift. And third, the future you're waiting for. It's already here. It's not a distant someday. It's right next to you, layered beneath your current. Perception like a hidden frequency. The skills our remote viewers developed, the ability to sense across time, to touch events not yet happened, those are natural human abilities, not gifts, just capacities waiting to unfold as we shed our old assumptions. I know how this sounds. God, believe me, I know. 5 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. I would have dismissed this as sci-fi nonsense, some lunatic spiral after too many late nights reading classified documents in an underground bunker. But I've seen it, not just in theory, not just on paper, but in experience. I've felt timelines collapse into certainty. I've lived the future as present reality. And more importantly, I've seen it start to ripple outward. The signs are everywhere, symbols showing up in places they shouldn't. Dreams that feel too real, like memories you've never lived. Encounters with strangers that feel impossibly familiar. And that gnawing feeling, that gut-deep sense that the official explanations don't line up with what you're actually experiencing. You're not crazy. You're waking up. And you're not alone. They're not random glitches in reality, not signs you're breaking down. They're symptoms of something deeper. Consciousness is changing. The hard lines between me and we, between personal thought and collective awareness, are starting to blur. If you're feeling it, if strange things have started happening, if the world feels like it's vibrating just under the surface, then no, you're not crazy. You're waking up. You're becoming more sane than this world ever taught you to be. At Project Looking Glass, we proved something that still shakes me to the core. The convergence can't be stopped, not by force, not by silence, not by burying it under concrete and protocol, but it can be understood, and that understanding is everything. It's the difference between terror and awe, between clinging to the past and walking into what's next with your eyes wide open. They told us again and again, you can't stop the convergence. But maybe, just maybe, we can comprehend it. And maybe that's enough. I'm telling you this now because the old world is ending, quietly and not all at once, but it is ending. And the new one is already beginning, even if most people can't see it yet. And there are still people, maybe people like you, who need to hear that they're not alone in sensing it. Those classified programs, the off-books facilities, the hidden machines, they were never the story. They were the opening chapter, the table setting, the real story. It's happening right now, inside you, as you listen to this. The machine didn't just see the future, it linked to it. And now that link is spreading, person to person, moment to moment, through the network of human consciousness itself. Maybe you've noticed it already. Maybe you've brushed it off. Coincidences that feel too precise to ignore. A thought and then a message. A dream that delivers knowledge you couldn't possibly know. An unshakable certainty, even when logic says you shouldn't be certain about anything. These aren't flukes. They're echoes, ripples, proof that your consciousness is brushing up against the same quantum field that powered Project Looking Glass. That field is becoming accessible now, not just to people with clearance or training, but to anyone whose awareness has shifted enough to reach for it. Our remote viewers, those strange, brilliant people, weren't genetically unique. They weren't mystics or chosen ones. They were just people who had, somehow, unlearned the limitations the rest of us were taught to accept. And that's the terrifying, liberating truth. Those limitations, they're not real, they're learned, which means they can be unlearned. Every time you trust your gut instead of a headline, your consciousness expands. Every time you notice a pattern that shouldn't exist and feel a strange certainty bloom in your chest, you're reaching into the quantum field. Every time you move forward on something that feels right, even though you can't explain why, you're stepping deeper into the convergence, and that's why they shut us down. Not because Looking Glass failed, but because it worked too well. It showed them a future they couldn't control. A world where the tools of manipulation, fear, division, blind obedience, didn't work anymore. A world where people didn't need to be ruled because they could see truth for themselves. So they tried to lock it away, scatter the research, silence the people involved, but they were too late. Because in the end, the real machine wasn't the ring or the chamber or the field generators. It was us, our minds, our awareness. And you can't bury that. You can't redact human consciousness. You can't shut down evolution with a classified memo. So if you've been dreaming things that come true, if you've felt time stutter for a moment, like a skipped heartbeat, if you've known something deep in your bones with no idea how you knew it, you're not malfunctioning. You're connecting, because the machine didn't see the end of the world. It saw you. It saw this moment. Right now. It saw someone like me, who worked in the shadows of black projects, finally step forward and speak. And it saw someone like you listening. Someone whose awareness was just open enough to receive a message that couldn't be confined by any security clearance or chain of command. It saw you deciding to trust yourself, to trust your own expanding awareness over the voices that insist this can't be real. It saw you stepping into your role, not as a follower, but as a bridge between two worlds, one built on fear and separation, and one emerging from connection, clarity, and conscious choice. The convergence isn't coming. It's here. It's always been here, just waiting for enough of us to grow into it. And now, you're one of them. Welcome to the future. Welcome home. Tonight's narrative is called Project Selene, a conspiracy thriller that begins with lost tapes, buried archives, and a truth too dangerous for history books. We'll journey through forgotten NASA film reels, whispered rumors about the moon landing, and the chilling possibility that what we saw on the surface was never the whole story. But remember, this isn't just a story about the past. It's a key to the present, and maybe, just maybe, a doorway to the future. The storage vault smelled like time had stopped. The sharp scent of old cardboard, mildew, and rusted metal lingered in the still air. A heavy silence hung around the place, broken only by the low buzz of a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. Nolan Price stood just outside, squinting under the glare of the Houston sun. The building was an aging, cinder-block relic from the Cold War, now barely more than a forgotten structure on the government's books. He held a letter in one hand, the Arcadia Aerospace Solutions logo stamped at the top. A private contractor that dabbled in everything from satellite tech to archival research, Arcadia had uncovered references to lost NASA footage in a sealed portion of this facility. They wanted Nolan, a freelance film restoration specialist, to digitize the reels, for historical preservation, they claimed. The pay was suspiciously high. The steel door let out a tired groan as it opened. A bored security guard in a faded uniform waved him through like he was expecting him. No ID check, no clipboard. Inside, the air was cool and stale. Rows of metal shelves stretched down the length of the warehouse, sagging under the weight of dusty boxes and film canisters, some marked with NASA logos, others blank or water-stained beyond recognition. Many had been slashed open, the contents haphazardly repacked. It felt more like a crime scene than a preservation site. He'd heard about NASA's reputation. Lost moon landing footage, missing rocket telemetry. But this was different. The secrecy reeked of something else. A woman approached him. Mid-40s, sharp suit, no smile. Madison Harlow, she said simply. Arcadia liaison. Without ceremony, she led Nolan through a side hallway into a smaller room, probably once an office, now converted into a crude editing suite. The walls were yellowed with age. A dented 16mm projector sat beside a reel rewinder and a modern digital capture device. Stacks of canisters lined one wall. Apollo 11, Raw, Apollo 12, Ava, Saturn telemetry hole, and others marked cryptically as Selene B. She handed him a passkey and a single sheet of instructions. "Your job's straightforward," she said. "Transfer the reels to high-resolution digital. Flag any degradation or anomalies. No commentary, no copies. Understood?" Her voice was flat, professional. But there was an edge to it, like the rules weren't suggestions. Nolan nodded. "Got it. Discretion's part of the deal." "Good," she said, already walking away. "We want it done quickly. Stick to the schedule." For the next few days, Nolan worked alone in the musty suite, carefully threading reels through the projector, capturing the footage frame by frame. At first, everything seemed routine. Grainy shots of mission prep, rocket staging, astronauts zipping up their suits. The old audio buzzed with ground control static and calm NASA voices counting down procedures. The footage was worn but oddly comforting, a nostalgia for a time he hadn't lived in. Men aiming for the stars with slide rules and gut instinct. But on the third day, something changed. One reel caught his eye. The label was odd. Apollo 11, Stage B, Take 3. Take 3. NASA never labeled reels like that. Normally it'd be mission day or timeline codes, not something you'd expect on a film set. Curious, Nolan loaded the reel and watched as it flickered to life. At first, it looked like a lunar surface. Grey dust, astronaut suits, familiar. But then a voice off-camera shouted, "Positions! And action!" 2 astronauts stepped into frame, bouncing lightly across the terrain. One tripped slightly and laughed. Then another voice, more agitated, called out, "Cut! Reset!" That visor's catching too much reflection. Nolan sat upright, heart racing. This wasn't mission footage. This was a production, a set. You could see the overhead lighting rigs, catch glimpses of wires along the black backdrop, trying and failing to mimic the starless sky. Rewinding, Nolan caught it clearly. A crew member, half hidden behind a fake crater, holding a boom mic. He checked the reel's edge code, 1971, but Apollo 11 aired in 1969. Could it be a simulation? NASA did run practice drills, but they were always labeled that way. They never used clapperboards. They didn't call out action. He digitized it, quietly labeling it as an anomaly, and moved on. The next few reels returned to standard, mission content, but a seed of doubt had already been planted. That night in his motel, sleep wouldn't come. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The laughter, the wires, the casually spoken cut. If it was training footage, why bury it? The next morning, restless and uneasy, he returned to the warehouse early and pulled out one of the most damaged reels, labelled Selene B. The canister was dented and sticky around the edges. He cracked it open carefully. It began with the standard NASA color bars, a momentary hum of tone. Then the image cut. What followed was not a moon mission. It was chaos. A shaky handheld shot moved through what looked like a studio. Wires crisscrossing the ceiling, set, pieces that resembled spacecraft interiors, but cheap, unfinished. Technicians moved around hurriedly. One looked directly into the camera and mouthed something Nolan couldn't make out. No audio, no slate. Then, without warning, the footage jumped. A hard cut. And now the camera stood still. In front of it, a fake lunar landscape, eerily similar to the one in the Apollo 11 Take 3 reel. But this time, no actors, no movement, just the sound of static. Then a whisper, deep in the background, barely audible, repeating like a broken loop. They're watching. Nolan ripped off his headphones. The hum of the projector sounded, suddenly too loud. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch. He looked behind him. Empty. He labeled the file, saved it, shut everything down. As he left the suite, something gnawed at him. Not just fear, but a kind of sick curiosity. The quiet, kind that grows in the corners of your mind when things don't line up. What was Project Selene? Why bury the reels? And if the moon landing had truly been staged, if even a piece of that was true, how deep did the lie go? Outside, the sun was already falling. Long shadows stretched across the pavement as Nolan got into his car. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if what he was preserving was history, or something meant to stay buried. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. Behind him, inside that concrete tomb, the reels waited, still spinning, still whispering. Men in dark suits stood clustered around what looked like a half-assembled lunar lander set. The harsh overhead lights cast long shadows across the warehouse floor, illuminating their faces in stark contrast. One man, wearing a white shirt stained slightly at the collar, held a clipboard and read aloud in a steady, rehearsed tone. Lunar surface continuity, camera feed approach. We need to ensure the horizon matches the predicted lens angle. Another man, older, with thick-rimmed glasses and thinning hair, gave a solemn nod. His voice was quieter, but carried weight. We fake it right, or we fail. Understood? Nolan's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer to the screen, the hum of the projector now distant under the pounding of his heart. This wasn't practice or simulation. This was premeditated deception. The men in the footage weren't discussing technical procedure. They were talking about how to make it look real, hiding the stage edges, positioning lights to mimic lunar shadows. One line echoed in Nolan's mind. The public must see only the broadcast feed from the designated channel. He stopped the reel with a trembling hand, staring at the film, still fluttering through the machine. His pulse roared in his ears. If this footage was real, it was evidence, proof, that the most iconic moment in human history might have been carefully staged theatre. He set the reel aside, hands damp with sweat. His thoughts raced. This could be a masterful fake, maybe someone's decades-old satire or backup PR footage. But the film stock was undeniably vintage. The chemical wear, the subtle grain, the analog tone, it all pointed to the late 1960s. He took a breath and dove back into the archive boxes, compelled by a mix of horror and obsession. His fingers landed on a note card slipped between two reels. It read, PSH, Kubrick Liaison. He stared. Kubrick. Could they mean Kubrick? As in Stanley Kubrick. The name was never spelled in full, just scribbled hints. S. Kukob. But it clicked. The wild rumours he'd laughed off in the past, that NASA hired Kubrick to film backup footage of the moon landing in case of mission failure, suddenly didn't seem so laughable. The next reel label made his skin crawl. Moon Landing Studio. Revan. He stared at it. It didn't make sense. He suddenly felt small, like he was peering through a keyhole into a reality that had been carefully sealed off for decades. That evening, as the shadows grew long and the warehouse lights buzzed, overhead a tight unease gripped his chest. He didn't feel alone. Not exactly. Several times, while crossing an aisle, he thought he saw movement, just a flicker of shadow ducking behind shelves. Probably nothing. Probably the faulty lights. Still, he took precautions. Nolan locked the suspect reels, especially the Kubrick-related footage and the Apollo 11 Stage B Take 3 tape, into a small storage closet inside the editing room. He planned to finish digitizing everything by week's end, then back it up, verify, and reassess. But when he returned to his workstation after a short break, the Stage B Take 3 reel was gone. Panic shot through him. He tore the room apart, checked the desk, the shelves, the boxes, nothing. In its place on the spool where he'd left the tape was a single reel with a handwritten label, Celine E., Do Not Watch. His mouth went dry. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had swapped it out. Someone knew. His instincts screamed to leave it alone. But curiosity, the fatal kind, overpowered. Fear. With trembling fingers, he loaded Celine E. into the projector. The reel began with distorted static. Then a still shot appeared, an empty crater under artificial light. A voice, reversed, distorted, whispered, "This is not for you. Turn back." The footage jumped. Seemingly random rocket test clips, then cut again. An older man sat in a dim room, half his face lit by a desk lamp. His lips moved, forming silent words Nolan couldn't decipher. Then more static. The film ended. Nolan sat frozen. This wasn't just conspiracy theory territory anymore. This was personal. Someone had accessed the room, had removed footage, had left this warning, and Project Celine. It wasn't just a random archive tag. It was something more. A name tied to secrecy, buried truth, and manipulation. A top-secret operation designed to rewrite the most celebrated story of the 20th century. He had to know more, had to be sure. That night, Nolan made a decision. He'd reach out to Dr. Eliza Trent, a former NASA contractor turned independent aerospace historian. She was sharp, respected, and more importantly, known for her ruthless honesty with government documents. If anyone could help him verify the authenticity of the tapes, it was her. He didn't sleep that night. The warehouse felt colder than usual, the air tighter. He checked and rechecked the door locks. Every small sound made him flinch, and still, the voice from Celine E echoed in his head. We told them we went to the moon, and they believed. The next morning, Nolan parked outside a modest brick building in downtown Houston. The sign on the glass door read, Trent Aerospace Historical Consulting. Inside, Dr. Eliza Trent sat in a cluttered office surrounded by towers of file boxes, old mission documents, and shelves lined with books on NASA and aerospace history. She looked up as he stepped in. "Let me guess," she said, raising an eyebrow. "You're the archivist who left the urgent message." He hesitated, debating whether to use his real name. She waved it off. "Don't worry. You're not the first to call under an alias. Sit." Nolan sat across from her, heart pounding. He reached into his coat and pulled out the thumb drive. "I need you to see something," he said. "And I need to know if it's real." Dr. Trent glanced at the device, then at Nolan's pale face. "Well," she said, plugging it in, "let's find out who's been rewriting history." Dr. Trent slid the flash drive into her laptop with a soft click. On screen, grainy, time-worn, footage began to play, fragments of what looked like a fabricated moon landing set, interspersed with cryptic references to something called Celine B. Her brows furrowed. She leaned closer, pausing frames, zooming in. The film grain, speech cadence, suit design, she murmured to herself. If this is real, it could be devastating. But it could also be a damn good fake, she added under her breath, her voice tinged with wary skepticism. I've seen elaborate hoaxes before. Let me cross-check everything. Production stamps, older NASA logos, even badge styles. Nolan stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her closely. There was this one reel, he said quietly. They swapped it out while I was watching. Then there were the reversed whispers on the Celine AE footage. One spool just vanished overnight. Dr. Trent's face tightened. If you're not making this up, then you're in serious trouble. These kinds of materials don't just disappear. For fun, she sat back, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. Officially, NASA always said all mission footage was archived. Some lost, maybe, but never evidence of staging. Still, she glanced at the screen again, eyes narrowing. There were rumors, back in the day. A fallback plan, if the live mission. Footage failed. Nothing confirmed, but old engineers talked. Nolan watched her process, the screen's glow reflecting in her lenses. We need to dig deeper, she said, leaning in again. See here? A mission patch in the corner, correct to Apollo 11. And that voice, off camera, it references the real module's descent angle. Altitude matches too. If this is a fake, it's a frighteningly good one. Then she froze, clicking back to an earlier frame. A man stood in the shadows behind the set, wearing a black suit, face partially turned. Her eyes widened. I know that face, she said softly. That's Marcus Harlow, never appeared in public press. Rumored to be NASA's internal media. Liaison. Some even said he coordinated with Kubrick. Nolan blinked. Stanley Kubrick? She gave a dry nod. It sounds insane, but during the Cold War, beating the Soviets was all that mattered. If there was any chance the real mission might fail, staging footage wasn't just a backup. It was a necessity. She paused. But this feels like more than insurance. This looks like an entire simulation, not a backup, an alternative reality. And if that's true? She let the sentence hang. She turned to Nolan. You need to get more, but be careful. You have no idea who you're dealing with. That night, they parted. Dr. Trent would consult NASA's archives. Nolan agreed to revisit the facility. By morning, he was standing in front of the same rusted gates, but now they were padlocked. A new sign read, Under renovation, Arcadia Aerospace. He called Harlow. Disconnected. A security guard appeared, stone-faced. Projects on indefinite hold. No entry permitted. Nolan clenched his fists. They were sealing it off, erasing it. He rushed back to his apartment, heart hammering. If they got to the tapes, his digital copies might be all that remained. He backed them up again. 3 flash drives, each stored separately. But when he tried emailing Dr. Trent another snippet, a warning popped up. Transmission blocked. Suspicious content. He stared at the screen. Someone had breached his system. They were watching, listening. Desperate for leads, Nolan combed through reels he'd already digitized. One, unlabeled and damaged, showed a man sitting alone in a stark corner lit with a harsh spotlight. The 70s aesthetic was unmistakable. Polyester suit, shaggy haircut. The man looked straight into the camera, pale and trembling. Nolan reversed the distorted audio. The voice emerged, strained. Project Selene. Never meant to be seen. We built illusions for the greater good. A cough then. We lied. Or we lost the war. The man looked away, then back again. I left a final record. Saturn Archives. Static swallowed the rest. Nolan sat back, reeling. Saturn Archives, he whispered. Could it mean the Saturn? Vlogs? Or something deeper? An internal repository? A code name? Was this man the rumoured original whistleblower? Red Hand? He called Dr. Trent immediately. She answered in a panic, whispering, "My home office has been ransacked. They took my microfilms. I saw them, men in suits, just waiting outside my building. I think Arcadia Aerospace is a cover, a Black Ops front." "We need to meet," Nolan said quickly. "Public place, cameras, witnesses. Bring the reel." They agreed to meet the next morning at a crowded downtown bus terminal. But Dr. Trent never showed. Nolan waited, pacing. Her phone was off. Her apartment line rang endlessly. Later that afternoon, the news quietly mentioned a series of strange accidents. 2 elderly former NASA engineers, both deceased under suspicious circumstances. No foul play officially suspected. Nolan didn't believe in coincidence anymore. The obituaries came quietly. 2 retired NASA engineers, one a supposed telemetry analyst, the other only vaguely tied to lunar-era logistics, died days apart. One of a stroke, the other a sudden heart attack. At their age, no one questioned it. Local papers ran tiny notices. National media didn't mention a word. Bigger stories swallowed the news cycle. But online, in the corners of obscure conspiracy forums, the chatter was different. Moon archivist missing, spike in NASA retiree deaths. Project Selene rumor intensifies. A user named Apollo Truth posted a cryptic message that caught Nolan's eye. Look to LB7. The final broadcast is hidden. LB7. Nolan stared at the post. Could it be Lunar Base 7? That phrase had floated through some of the tapes. Or maybe LB7 was a code name, an internal label for a hidden stage. He pulled up his digitized catalogue, scrolling for anything tagged with LB7 or similar. After nearly an hour of combing through mislabeled files, he found something. El Dito footage. Move. He opened it. The screen flickered to life. Bizarre outtakes, multiple rovers positioned on what looked like different backdrops of cratered terrain, lighting rigs visible in the corners. A half-visible script taped to a control panel read, "The audience sees only the final cut." In another snippet, a tense-looking NASA official barked off camera, "We can't let them see the starfield difference. We'll keep it black." The implication was horrifying. The footage wasn't just altered, it was crafted. As the tension rose in his gut, Nolan's paranoia started to sharpen into certainty. He noticed unfamiliar cars loitering on his street, never parked in the same spot twice. The building's old caretaker knocked on his door one evening. "Men came by earlier," he said, voice low. "Showed me IDs. Said they were with the Department of Energy. Asked about you. Nolan's chest tightened. He didn't wait to see who knocked next. He stuffed his hard drives, flash backups, and reels into a battered duffel bag, grabbed his laptop, and headed to the bus station. He bought a ticket under a false name and boarded a night bus heading west, destination vague. But he had a lead, something Dr. Trent had mentioned during one of their late-night calls. A rumored, decommissioned NASA communications station deep in the desert. Supposedly, it housed telemetry backups, unfiltered, raw transmissions from the Apollo era. If the reels he found were fabricated illusions, then maybe the signals recorded out there held the truth, one way or the other. On the bus, Nolan sat, slumped in a window seat, the darkness outside punctuated by flickering highway lights. Exhaustion gnawed at him, but his mind raced. If they never landed on the moon, what did that say about everything? About 50 years of textbooks, documentaries, and global awe. He rubbed his eyes, heart hammering. Maybe they did land. But the footage? Maybe it had been staged, altered to match expectations, to hide errors, or to win a war of optics. Somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, his head nodded forward, and static crackled in his mind. A voice, distorted and distant. We told them we were first. The Soviets believed we soared. Project Selene was the key to winning hearts, no matter the cost. Nolan jerked awake, chest heaving. The dream, or whatever it was, had the same cadence as the reversed voice on the old tapes. Was his subconscious recycling fragments? Or was something else creeping in? He was close now. The next afternoon, after hours of walking under a brutal sun, duffel strap digging into his shoulder, he found it. A rusted metal sign, mostly illegible, barely visible behind sand-blasted fencing. It had once read, NASA Remote, Telemetry Station, LB7. The buildings beyond the fence were low, squat, and lifeless. The whole area had an eerie stillness. No birds, no movement, just desert and wire, and the creaking of wind against metal. Nolan scouted the perimeter. Motion sensors blinked faintly above a decaying doorway. The main gate was chained shut, but the fence had been weakened at one corner. He slipped through, shouldering his way toward a side entrance. The door was locked, handle rusted stiff. He reached into his bag, pulled out a crowbar, borrowed from a tool shed back in town, and forced it open with a loud crack that echoed in the silent complex. Inside, the air was stale, dry. Dust floated in beams of sunlight breaking through broken blinds. The floor creaked beneath his boots. It smelled of old electronics, insulation, and history. The hallway led him to a control room. It looked like a time capsule. Monitors coated in dust, wires trailing like veins. The walls were lined with aging equipment labeled in faded print Apollo, Gemini, Deep Space TLM. He stood still, staring at it all, half expecting the machines to spark awake, to start humming again. He set down his bag, wiped dust from a console, and exhaled. He had made it. And now, the search for the truth, whatever it turned out to be, was about to begin. A wave of awe gripped Nolan as he stepped deeper into the crumbling facility. Dust hung in the air like ancient breath, and the cold, sterile scent of metal and mildew filled his lungs. This had to be NASA's old telemetry center, maybe even the original one used to send or receive lunar signals. If the Watchers really wanted to keep the illusion alive, they'd definitely leave some of the old infrastructure intact. His eyes landed on a door in the corner, newer than everything else around it. The locks were shiny and fresh, recently replaced. His heart pounded. Someone had been here. Summoning his courage, Nolan forced the lock with a crowbar he'd brought, the steel groaning under the pressure before giving way with a sharp crack. He swung the door open. Inside was a smaller side lab, much cleaner and colder than the rest of the facility. Modern computers buzzed softly on metal tables. This place wasn't abandoned at all. It was still in use, probably still monitored. The air in the room felt heavier now. He moved quickly, searching drawers and shelves until he found what looked like an active terminal, humming quietly in sleep mode. A yellowing post-it was pinned above the screen. Archive Celine. Authorized. Access only. His pulse jumped. Jackpot. Nolan powered up the machine and connected his laptop to the console. The system demanded credentials. He typed, Celine, access denied. He tried again. Apollo 1969. Still nothing. Frustrated, he rummaged through the desk and found a crumpled note buried beneath papers. It listed some old access codes, most of them faded, but one phrase stood out, Tranquility Base, worth a try. He typed it in, hands trembling. Access granted. The screen flashed green. He was in. The directories were strange, cryptic. One folder was labeled Live Stage, Feed 69 Simulation, Mix Broadcast, Cut. He stared, heart hammering. It was real. The simulation theory, the idea that the moon landing, at least parts of it, had been staged. This folder confirmed it. Another directory caught his eye. Archive, Trent Comms, Trent. That name. Dr. Eliza Trent, a former NASA comms specialist rumored to have gone missing. Could this be her attempt to leak the truth? He opened the file. The video was grainy and unstable. A woman sat in a chair under a harsh spotlight, hands trembling, face bruised. It was Dr. Trent. "We can't keep lying," she said, voice shaking. "People deserve..." Then the footage cut out. Nolan froze, stomach dropping. She'd been taken, interrogated. Maybe worse. The watchers weren't just covering something up, they were erasing people to do it. He looked at the equipment around him. An old satellite uplink controller sat to the side, relic of the 60s deep space transmissions. If it still worked, he could bypass the internet entirely. He could broadcast everything, unedited, straight into the open ether. No algorithms, no censorship. A final, unstoppable transmission. He scrambled for cables, dragging them across the floor. Dust billowed as he connected terminals, fingers flying across keys. The generator kicked on with a low, sputtering growl. Upstairs, the facility's rooftop dish creaked, then slowly turned, reactivating after decades of dormancy. The screen now showed available signal frequencies, low Earth comms, civil broadcast bands, even shortwave radio. He selected them all. Next, he cued the raw footage. The fake moon landing sets, the outtakes with directors calling for retakes, audio logs discussing how we never left Earth, we built illusions. And finally, Dr. Trent's clip. He hit transmit. A bar appeared on the screen, uploading. 10%, 20%, then boots, heavy, fast, pounding against concrete. Nolan's blood went cold. They were here. Flashlight beams sliced through the dusty hallway outside the lab. Shadows loomed. He slammed a filing cabinet against the door. The hinges rattled. Gunfire cracked. Splinters exploded from the wooden frame. Percent he had to hold out. He crouched behind the console, scanning the room for anything that could buy him time. His eyes landed on an old flare pistol, probably meant for emergencies. He grabbed it. 70% shots tore through the cabinet. The door buckled. Nolan gritted his teeth and pulled the trigger. Fwoom! The flare burst in the hallway, a sudden blaze of white light and smoke. The watchers ducked back, disoriented. He ducked again behind the console. Sparks flew as return fire slammed into the walls. The system beeped steadily. 80%, 85%. One of the watchers, a tall man in a black mask, forced his way through the smoke and debris. He aimed a rifle at Nolan. "Stop the transmission," he barked. His voice was sharp and cruel. "You shut it down now, or you die." Nolan's voice shook. "It's too late," he whispered. "The world's going to see it all." The man stormed toward the console, trying to yank the cables out, but Nolan had already. rigged multiple backups and redundancies. The data kept climbing. 97%. Shut it off, the masked man screamed again. No, Nolan said, backing away, chest heaving. You can't bury this anymore. 100%, the console beeped. Broadcast complete. The signal surged through every open frequency, reaching radio towers, digital receivers, even old analog feeds still functional in rural areas. There was no stopping it now. The masked man paused, as if realizing in that instant he'd lost. Then we'll bury you, he hissed. The shot rang out. Nolan felt it before he heard it. A hot, searing pain in his chest. He dropped to his knees, air fleeing his lungs like a broken balloon. He collapsed behind the console, choking on blood, vision dimming. He watched as the watchers frantically tried to destroy the console, smashing monitors and tearing out cables. But it didn't matter anymore. The feed was out. Unstoppable. In the last seconds of his fading consciousness, Nolan saw the final screen flicker with one message: broadcast to all frequencies, transmission complete. And far beyond the lab, across radios, TVs, old satellites, backup archives, people everywhere watched the footage. They saw the stage sets, the actors in astronaut suits, the clipped commands from directors. They heard the whispered confessions. We never left Earth. And they saw the woman, Dr. Eliza Trent, begging the world to know the truth. The illusion was broken. And Nolan, in his final breath, knew he had won. How does one move in moon gravity? That question, once scientific curiosity or trivia for space, buffs now burned through every social feed, late-night talk show, and whispered conversation around the world. The illusions weren't rumors anymore. They weren't fringe conspiracies or blurry videos on obscure forums. The full mosaic was out there, raw, undeniable, and seared into the public consciousness. Social media exploded within hours of Nolan's transmission. Even those who had mocked or dismissed dissenting voices now sat in stunned silence, watching the footage over and over. News anchors, visibly shaken, tried to keep pace with the chaos, but their scripts failed them. By the next morning, disbelief had melted into collective hysteria. Nolan lay on the cold lab floor, his breath shallow, chest rising unevenly. The watchers, having emptied their rifles into the equipment and into him, now receded down the corridor, the clang of their boots growing fainter with each step. They didn't even check if he was dead. Maybe they didn't care anymore. As darkness settled behind his eyes, a voice echoed in his memory, grainy and aged, from one of the old reels. The archivist had spoken plainly. We told them we left. Earth. We never had to. He didn't fight the end. A strange calm swept over him. He had done it. The world knew. Maybe Dr. Trent had seen the broadcast. Maybe she would survive now. When morning came, the internet didn't rest. Clips of the moon set, mocked-up craters, dusty sound stages, rigging systems, and shaky footage of technicians planning scene angles were everywhere. On X, formerly Twitter, streaming platforms, encrypted sharing groups, even pirate radio broadcasts, the footage was unfiltered and relentless. In one shot, a man in a NASA badge pointed to a chart, muttering, "This lens angle should keep the horizon authentic." Another clip showed actors in astronaut suits practicing how to hop with believable lunar physics. For millions, it was a betrayal of something sacred. This wasn't just a crack in a story, it was a rupture in faith. Debates erupted instantly. Was everything fake? Did any mission actually reach the moon? Or were there real flights masked by faked footage for the public? Scientists, historians, skeptics, and believers clashed in real time. NASA and the White House scrambled to respond, calling the footage fabricated and malicious propaganda, but their words fell flat. The level of detail in the footage, mission codenames, audio snippets from real astronauts, technical terminology known only to insiders, was too specific, too real, too deep. Reputable media outlets tried to trace a timeline. When did the faking start? Was Apollo 11 the only fabrication? Or all of them? Were the landers just probes while the broadcasts were theatre? Several former astronauts came forward angrily denying the claims. But curiously, others stayed silent. A few were unreachable. Some had died in the years leading up to this release, under murky circumstances. Journalists started asking, how many were silenced? Ironically, the conspiracy forums that had lived in the shadows for decades now found themselves in the spotlight. Every office, every coffee shop, every classroom had become an echo chamber of wild theories and stunned re-evaluations. Arcadia Aerospace, the company that had employed Nolan, was immediately targeted. Their official statement read, "We were told the material was standard archival footage from NASA. We had no reason to believe otherwise." But insider leaks painted a different picture. Former staffers hinted at black-budget contracts and old CIA ties. One leak suggested Arcadia had been founded by remnants of a Cold War-era intelligence unit. The name Project Selene started trending. No one knew exactly what it meant, but it was everywhere. Government agencies promised a full internal investigation. No one believed them. Outside NASA centers around the country, protesters gathered. Signs waved in the heat. "Tell us the truth, Moonlight Lies. We believed you." Some cried, not in anger, but in grief. People who had grown up idolizing the grainy images of Neil Armstrong's descent onto the lunar surface felt betrayed, as if a piece of their childhood had been ripped away. Then came the bombshell. Sarah Voss, thought to have vanished after being targeted by the Watchers, resurfaced. Pale, hollow-eyed, and visibly shaken, she published an op-ed titled Project Selene, The Greatest Story Never Told. In it, she described working with Nolan, helping uncover the lost reels, and the night they broke into the telemetry site. She confirmed Nolan's death, calling him a tragic hero in the war for truth. Her words resonated like scripture across the digital realm. Reactions poured in. Hashtags flooded the platforms. Nolan Truth. Project Selene. End Moon Hoax NASA. Cornered and crumbling, doubled down. We categorically deny staging any missions. The footage circulating is a maliciously edited hoax. But cracks had already formed, ECA. Few retired engineers stepped forward, carefully and without much detail. One claimed he was ordered to install broadcasting hardware in a mobile van during the Apollo 11 mission, but was never told why. Another remembered a film crew that was never accounted for in official reports. Then came a quiet voice, a retired caretaker from an old film lot in California. She spoke to a local reporter. "I remember the craters, the dust machines. I thought it was just a movie. But there were men in suits, military types. They said I wasn't supposed to talk about it, ever. It was no longer about the moon. It was about everything. The depth of the deception shook people. If they faked that, what else? How much of our history was real, and where were the Watchers now?" Rumours swirled of mass disappearances. A few were spotted fleeing across borders. Some said they'd gone underground. Others claimed they were simply blending back into the machine, onto new assignments, new illusions. In a dark, quiet place, somewhere buried deep in an old bunker or a forgotten facility, the original architects of Project Selene likely watched the chaos unfold. They had spent decades ensuring the official story drowned out any whisper of truth. Now, it was all out in the open. They had a choice: attempt one last disinformation campaign, or vanish forever. Some chose to vanish, and some, disturbingly, found comfort in the idea that the world, finally, no longer believed in everything it saw. Some people still believed we had the technology to land on the moon, that we could do it again if we truly wanted to, but others weren't so sure. A growing number claimed the entire Apollo program had been nothing more than an elaborate PR stunt, carefully staged to outpace the Soviets in the Cold War. To them, the moon landing wasn't a triumph of engineering, it was theatre, A smaller, more radical group went even further. They didn't just doubt it. They flat out refused to believe any of the footage, claiming it was an early version of what we'd now call deepfakes. The divide left society splintered, confused. Should we still celebrate what NASA had done, or start questioning everything we'd been told? Then came Dr. Eliza Trent. After months missing, presumed dead, she re-emerged, thinner, quieter, and with a deep look in her eyes that never quite went away. In a calm, cautious interview, she confirmed what many had only whispered about. She said she'd found logs, data entries tucked away in old NASA systems, clearly detailing how the original broadcast had been faked. They had to, she said softly, hands folded in her lap. At the time, during the Cold War, America needed a win, a visible win. Eliza wasn't completely dismissive, though. She believed some real lunar missions likely followed later, but those, she said, were buried beneath the spectacle of that first great illusion. It was necessary politically, she admitted, but the damage it did to public trust, that's something we're still dealing with. A year later, the debate hadn't died down, it had exploded. A new wave of historians published a book titled The Selene Deception, diving into how the fake landing footage cast a long shadow over the actual achievements that might have come after. Hollywood jumped on the story, releasing dramatized films and docu-series that divided viewers. Some called Nolan Price, a former archivist turned whistleblower, a hero who dared to expose the biggest lie in modern history. Others accused him of destabilizing national unity. In the scientific community, many mourned what was being lost. The confusion, they said, could cripple space exploration for decades. If people truly believed it was all a lie, then why fund more missions? Why dream about Mars or beyond? But history has a strange sense of irony. In the dusty corner of a thrift store in rural Florida, a metal film canister sat wedged between moldy VHS tapes. Its label, smudged but still legible, read, Selene Launch Rehearsal 5. No one knew it was. There, maybe the watchers, the rumoured shadow agency behind the cover-up, had simply missed it. One day, a curious shopper spotted the NASA stamp on the side. He paid $1 for it, thinking it might be a cool collector's piece. He took it home, placed it on a shelf in his living room, and forgot about it. If he ever bothered to watch it, if he had a working reel-to-reel projector, he'd see something incredible. A single, continuous take. An astronaut stumbling under, blinding studio lights. He removes his helmet mid-moonwalk and mutters, "God, it's hot in here." The label on the reel had faded, but just beneath the rust was a final note. For final illusions. Keep locked. Another piece of the puzzle, lost in time. Or maybe waiting for the right pair of eyes. As for Nolan Price, rumours swirled. No one had seen him since the last interview. A fisherman off the Gulf Coast claimed he once picked up a man who matched Nolan's description. Quiet, eyes heavy with something unspoken, carrying a worn leather bag filled with old film spools. A niche blogger received an anonymous letter, unsigned, thanking her for defending the truth. She swears the envelope smelled faintly of seawater, but no one really knows. If Nolan lived, he was no longer a man of the world. He had become something else. A shadow chasing shadows. A ghost in the wake of what Project Selene had revealed. The illusion had ended, but its consequences were just beginning. We used to look at the moon with pride, with wonder. Now, when we gaze up at that pale circle in the night sky, there's hesitation. Did we truly walk there, plant that flag, or did we build a stage to sell a dream? The search for truth, for something pure in all this deception, still burns in many of us. Maybe that hunger itself is proof of something beautiful. Our refusal to accept lies, no matter how comforting they are. Project Selene is now an infamous chapter in the story of human ambition, a dark reminder that when dreams are built on deception, Even the stars can feel hollow. And somewhere, in an old archive reel, somewhere between static and silence, a voice may still whisper, "We told them it was a giant leap for mankind, but, really, it was just a single step into the shadows." Over the next 30 minutes, you'll meet 3 people pulled deep into a new nightmare. Agent Silas Rock, Dr. Liana Sesh, and director Vance Haler. Their story revolves around a deadly pathogen known only as VX73. It started small, a quiet headline buried in the health section of a local paper. Mysterious respiratory illness detected in Port Maxwell. Most people didn't even read it. Within days, similar reports cropped up. An odd cough here, a string of ER visits there. Then everything changed. VX73 didn't act like normal viruses. Victims began with dry coughs, but within hours they were gasping, clawing at their throats, their lungs failing one breath at a time. Hospitals filled, panic spread, and in the halls of power, behind locked doors, a far more dangerous truth emerged. The illness wasn't natural, it was engineered. And someone, somewhere, had decided it was time to use it. For many, it happened fast. Just a few weeks, and the world changed. Schools closed without warning. Businesses shuttered their doors. Entire cities, places that once pulsed with life, fell silent under government-mandated quarantines. Officials called it a temporary emergency protocol. Most people knew better. Agent Silas Rock, 42, watched it all unfold from the heart of the Bureau of Federal Integrity, BFI. A decade into his career, he dealt with espionage, financial sabotage, and domestic threats. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this, for walking through cities turned to ghost towns, for watching windows go dark, day after day. Every morning, Silas suited up in his standard issue black vest, clipped his badge to his belt, and adjusted the tight respirator that dug into his cheeks. His world had shrunk to a set of sterile corridors, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. The walls at BFI were cluttered with corkboards packed with bulletins, updates, shifts, protocols. The only sounds were the hum of servers and a disembodied female voice from the PA, repeating the same instructions every half hour. Stay indoors. Maintain social distancing. All citizens must comply with the National Stabilization Bureau's guidelines. The National Stabilization Bureau, or NSB, had been created overnight, it seemed. Its job was to consolidate all emergency authority under one banner. Its leader, Director Vance Haler, appeared across every monitor in the BFI complex, always composed, always delivering calm, deliberate updates. Daily biometric scans are mandatory, he'd say, and unity serum distribution will begin shortly. We will endure. We will emerge stronger. Silas only knew Haler by reputation. A tall, relentless man, never seen without a suit, and that unshakable sense of purpose. When Silas passed him in the halls, he felt the weight of a man convinced the nation's survival depended on his every move. There was something both admirable and unsettling in it. Silas tried not to think too hard about it. His job was to serve. If the Unity Serum, the new vaccine, was the key to ending VX73, then so be it. Then came the summons. It was early, too early, a red flag. Silas was called into a briefing room with 4 senior officials. No names, just code identifiers. The mood was tight, tense. No coffee. No idle talk. There's disinformation being spread, one of them began, his voice low and clipped. Rumours that VX73 is synthetic, engineered, that it didn't originate naturally, Silas frowned. Online chatter? Some, but also, from inside, we need to find the source. The directive was simple. Track down whoever was spreading these theories. Discredit them. Neutralise the damage. At first, Silas agreed. In a crisis like this, fear was contagious. Panic could unravel everything. And conspiracy theories, left unchecked, had real-world consequences. But as he dove into logs, private, chat forums, and secured messaging platforms, something didn't sit right. Then he found the file. It was tucked away deep inside the BFI servers, in a hidden subdirectory that shouldn't have existed. The file name was vague. Project Paragon, preliminary.doc. It wasn't encrypted, just hidden, which was worse. He opened it. Inside, the language was clinical, stripped of emotion. Field tests planned in controlled sectors. Monitor subject compliance and social response. The timestamp was from months before the first reported case of VX73. Silas leaned back in his chair, breath caught in his throat. There were more documents, fragments referencing a private biotech firm contracted through the Department of Defense. Another discussed financial backing from several pharmaceutical giants, companies already profiting off vaccine development, testing kits, biometric tracking. Silas stared at the screen for a long time. His mind resisted the implications. If this was real, if this was more than just misfiled drafts or internal simulations, then the outbreak wasn't just a disaster. It might have been a calculated event. He copied the files to a flash drive, encrypted them, and wiped his access logs. For the next few days, Silas worked in silence, cross-referencing everything: names, project codes, funding chains. He routed his searches through foreign proxy servers, changed terminals every hour, took no phone calls. Still, something shifted. The BFI's internal network, normally silent in the background, began sending error pings. One day, his workstation froze mid-search. His credentials were flagged for routine verification, the digital equivalent of someone tapping your shoulder and smiling while they check if you're who you say you are. Silas didn't wait. He pocketed the flash drive and walked straight past the security scanners, heart pounding behind his respirator. His calm, practiced face never gave anything away, but in the pit of his stomach, he knew someone else had seen what he'd seen, and now they were watching him. Internal security channels had begun to pulse with chatter, subtle but unmistakable, mentions of a breach. Silas sat at his terminal, back straight, stomach twisted in a slow knot. Someone else was looking. Someone else had found pieces of the same truth he'd stumbled into. And that meant he wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a liability. In a string of old archived communications, one name kept surfacing: Dr. Liana Suresh, a virologist, former employee at a facility called Cerulean Labs. Silas hadn't heard of it before. Buried in the logs were clinical references, VX73 antigen trials, compliance metrics, immunoresponses. But something felt off. The language wasn't purely scientific. VX73 antigen trial shows 62% compliance rate. Additional modifications required. Compliance rate, not immunity rate. Not effectiveness. Compliance. Silas reread the line 3 times. The date on the file: 11 months before the first recorded case of VX73. His hands went cold on the keyboard. He leaned back in his chair, trying to slow his thoughts. Maybe the wording was sloppy. Maybe compliance was some internal jargon. But a deeper part of him, the same instinct that had kept him alive through covert ops and intelligence sweeps, knew better. The virus, the vaccine, the sudden, sweeping consolidation of power under the NSB. It was all connected. He forced himself to stay logical. Fear made people reckless. He needed proof, not panic. So he kept digging, downloaded what he could, catalogued every reference to Project Paragon, every odd phrasing, every inconsistent timeline. That night, he left the bureau late, the flash drive sewn carefully into the inner lining of his jacket. He walked calmly, head down, past the sterile security gates, past the retinal scanners and gunmetal walls. Outside, the city felt hollow. Main streets were empty, stores dark. The only movement came from military trucks rumbling through intersections and surveillance drones hovering overhead like steel vultures. Unity Serum, your key to tomorrow. The message blinked from every digital billboard. Silas moved quickly, weaving through side streets until he reached a relic, a payphone booth, one of the last still working. He stepped in and dialed a private number he hadn't used in years. "Yeah," the voice answered after 2 rings. Quiet. Tight. "It's me," Silas said. "I need help. I need you to run a bypass on a buried file behind bureau firewalls. Deep stuff, no questions." There was silence on the other end. Then, "You still in the bureau?" "I am." A sigh. "Then I'll help. But you need to be careful. This place, it's changing, man." "Yeah," Silas said softly. "I've noticed." He hung up and stepped back into the cold air. Around him, the city buzzed with a strange silence, like a concert hall waiting for the first note. Neon signs flickered across shuttered shops. Somewhere in the distance, a drone's engines flared. As Silas turned the corner, a searchlight bathed him in white. He froze. The drone hovered, its lens scanning. A soft beep. Then it drifted on. He exhaled slowly, shoulders tight. No red flags. Yet, at the mouth of an alley, he ducked into the old metro system. It smelled of rust and stale air. He kept walking, steps echoing. It hit him. Then, not just fear, but a sick kind of clarity. He had believed in the Bureau, in its mission, its purpose. Every assignment he'd ever carried out was supposed to be for national security, for the public good. But if what he'd found was real, then the greatest threat wasn't VX-73. It was the plan behind it. Across the country, the virus raged. Cities, once alive with traffic, laughter, movement, gone. People huddled in their homes. Drones tracked faces. Soldiers stood at intersections like statues of a new regime. And the camps, containment centers they called them, sprung up overnight. No trials, no oversight. Just safety. The media didn't question it. Every anchor repeated the same script. VX-73 is mutating. The only protection is full compliance. The only hope is Unity Serum. Director Vance Haylor appeared nightly, arms folded behind his back, eyes steady. Unity Serum is over 90% effective, proven, safe. Your duty to your nation begins with a single dose, but Silas saw what came next. Within a month, the unvaccinated weren't just at risk, they were unpersoned. Bank accounts locked, transit passes disabled, IDs revoked, no jab, no rights. Entire communities slipped into the shadows, forced to barter for food, rely on black markets, or simply disappear. Through it all, Agent Silas Rock wore his uniform by day, enforcing compliance, running protocols, checking bioscans, and by night, he pored over Project Paragon. The puzzle only grew darker. One document referenced something buried inside the vaccine itself, an embedded device, nano-emitter. It was designed to migrate through the bloodstream, settle in the limbic system, the part of the brain that processed emotion, memory, and decision-making. Targeted response activation achievable via low-frequency EM pulses, the document read. Compliance can be encouraged in high-resistance populations. Silas's heart pounded as he read the line over and over. Encouraged. He knew what that meant. The serum wasn't just a vaccine. It was a tool for control. Internal security channels had begun to pulse with chatter, subtle but unmistakable. Mentions of a breach. Silas sat at his terminal, back straight, stomach twisted in a slow knot. Someone else was looking. Someone else had found pieces of the same truth he'd stumbled into. And that meant he wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a liability. In a string of old archived communications, one name kept surfacing. Dr. Liana Suresh, a virologist, former employee at a facility called Cerulean Labs. Silas hadn't heard of it before. Buried in the logs were clinical references, VX-73, antigen trials, compliance metrics, immunoresponses, but something felt off. The language wasn't purely scientific. VX-73 antigen trial shows 62% compliance rate. Additional modifications required. Compliance rate? Not immunity rate. Not effectiveness. Compliance. Silas reread the line 3 times. The date on the file? 11 months before the first recorded case of VX73. His hands went cold on the keyboard. He leaned back in his chair, trying to slow his thoughts. Maybe the wording was sloppy. Maybe compliance was some internal jargon. But a deeper part of him, the same instinct that had kept him alive through covert ops and intelligence sweeps, knew better. The virus, the vaccine, the sudden, sweeping consolidation of power under the NSB. It was all connected. He forced himself to stay logical. Fear made people reckless. He needed proof, not panic. So he kept digging, downloaded what he could, catalogued every reference to Project Paragon, every odd phrasing, every inconsistent timeline. That night, he left the bureau late, the flash drive sewn carefully into the inner lining of his jacket. He walked calmly, head down, past the sterile security gates, past the retinal scanners and gunmetal walls. Outside, the city felt hollow. Main streets were empty, stores dark. The only movement came from military trucks rumbling through intersections and surveillance drones hovering overhead like steel vultures. Unity Serum, your key to tomorrow. The message blinked from every digital billboard. Silas moved quickly, weaving through side streets until he reached a relic, a payphone booth, one of the last still working. He stepped in and dialed a private number he hadn't used in years. "Yeah?" the voice answered after 2 rings. "Quiet, tight. It's me," Silas said. "I need help. I need you to run a bypass on a buried file behind bureau firewalls. Deep stuff, no questions." There was silence on the other end. Then, "You still in the bureau?" "I am." A sigh. "Then I'll help. But you need to be careful. This place, it's changing, man." "Yeah," Silas said softly. "I've noticed." He hung up and stepped back into the cold air. Around him, the city buzzed with a strange silence, like a concert hall waiting for the first note. Neon signs flickered across shuttered shops. Somewhere in the distance, a drone's engines flared. As Silas turned the corner, a searchlight bathed him in white. He froze. The drone hovered, its lens scanning. A soft beep. Then it drifted on. He exhaled. Slowly, shoulders tight, no red flags yet. At the mouth of an alley, he ducked into the old metro system. It smelled of rust and stale air. He kept walking, steps echoing. It hit him then, not just fear, but a sick kind of clarity. He had believed in the Bureau, in its mission, its purpose. Every assignment he'd ever carried out was supposed to be for national security, for the public good. But if what he'd found was real, then the greatest threat wasn't VX73. It was the plan behind it. Across the country, the virus raged. Cities once alive with traffic, laughter, movement, gone. People huddled in their homes. Drones tracked, faces. Soldiers stood at intersections like statues of a new regime. And the camps, containment centers they called them, sprung up overnight. No trials, no oversight, just safety. The media didn't question it. Every anchor repeated the same script. VX73 is mutating. The only protection is full compliance. The only hope is Unity Serum. Director Vance Haylor appeared nightly, arms folded behind his back, eyes steady. Unity Serum is over 90% effective, proven, safe. Your duty to your nation begins with a single dose. But Silas saw what came next. Within a month, the unvaccinated weren't just at risk. They were unpersoned, bank accounts locked, transit passes disabled, IDs revoked, no jab, no rights. Entire communities slipped into the shadows, forced to barter for food, rely on black markets, or simply disappear. Through it all, Agent Silas Rock wore his uniform by day, enforcing compliance, running protocols, checking bioscans, and by night, he pored over Project Paragon. The puzzle only grew darker. One document referenced something buried inside the vaccine itself, an embedded device. Nano-emitter. It was designed to migrate through the bloodstream, settle in the limbic system, the part of the brain that processed emotion, memory, and decision-making. Targeted response activation achievable via low-frequency EM pulses, the document read. Compliance can be encouraged in high-resistance populations. Silas's heart pounded as he read the line over and over. Encouraged. He knew what that meant. The serum wasn't just a vaccine, it was a tool for control. Neurological regulation markers confirm mild sedation of aggression, increased docility, potential for broader cognitive modulation pending further trials. Silas's stomach twisted as he read the line again. He felt cold, the kind of chill that didn't come from outside, but from something rotting inside you. Dread. Was this real? Could the government really be using a public health crisis to quietly roll out a large-scale mind-altering program? It sounded insane, but there it was, in the files. Clinical, precise, terrifying. He couldn't shake the nausea that came with the possibility. He needed answers. Through a secure channel, he reached out to the only name in the files that seemed connected to the science behind it. Dr. Liana Suresh. It took days of encrypted messages, each short, cautious and distant. She didn't trust easily, but eventually, after enough back and forth and verification, she agreed to meet. The location was an abandoned warehouse near the old docks, a place no one visited anymore. Silas arrived 30 minutes early, scanning the street under the flickering, orange haze of a dying street lamp. The air smelled like salt water and rust, mixed with the faint sour tang of mildew. Every sound, the distant slap of waves, the groan of shifting metal, put him on edge. No drones, no black sedans. Still, he kept a hand near the small pistol tucked in his coat. She appeared from the shadows like she belonged to them. Hooded jacket, cloth mask, only her eyes exposed. They were sharp and watchful, but tired too, like someone who hadn't slept soundly in years. Her right hand stayed near her pocket, ready. Pepper spray? Stun gun? Something. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was low, almost lost in the wind. Why should I believe you're not with them? Silas pulled the flash drive from his coat. Because I know what VX-73 really is, and I don't want to live in the world they're building. He recited lines from the internal memos, dates, trial codes, phrases no outsider should know. His voice trembled, not just from nerves, but from the weight of what he was saying. Liana's gaze shifted. Her eyes narrowed, then softened just slightly. She took a breath and nodded, her voice flat but full of history. I was on the early development team. VX-73 was supposed to be a defense against pandemics. That's what they told us. A proactive solution, targeted viral engineering. We modified how it interacted with alveolar receptors, supposedly to prevent severe infection. She paused, looking out into the darkness behind him as if seeing memories she'd tried to bury. But that wasn't the whole plan, she continued, quieter. We realized too late. They wanted a tool, a mechanism of control, something they could distribute under the guise of a cure. Silas's jaw clenched. His mind raced. The rumors about behavioral influence, mind control. Is it true? She hesitated, her breath shaky. It's not control in the science fiction sense. No one's turning into a robot. But it suppresses critical thinking, erodes emotional resistance, lowers the threshold for obedience. People become more suggestible, not instantly, but over time. It's slow, subtle, but very real. A silence settled between them. The kind of silence where neither person knew what to say, because saying anything felt like confirming the nightmare. Silas looked away, swallowing down the bile in his throat. They spoke quietly for another hour, exchanging technical terms, dates, lab names, enough to trace it all. Before they parted, Liana handed him a worn thumb drive. "These are my notes," she said. "The raw data, before it was redacted and twisted. It proves VX-73 is synthetic. It proves the behavioral mechanism was intentional." Silas took it gently, understanding the risk she was taking. She looked him dead in the eyes. "If they catch you with this, you won't be arrested. You'll disappear." A rat scurried across the cracked concrete behind them, its squeaks echoing faintly. The sound made Silas flinch. Everything suddenly felt fragile. The air, the moment, even reality itself. The soft slap of water against rusted dock pilings, the distant hum of power lines. Each sound seemed sharper, heavier. They said their goodbyes with a quiet nod, then disappeared in opposite directions into the night. Back at the Bureau for Infrastructure, BFI, Silas wore two faces. By day, he was the loyal analyst, blending in, doing what was asked. By night, he became something else. An archivist of forbidden knowledge, a man tracing shadows no one dared to name. Meanwhile, the capital descended into something unrecognizable. Military checkpoints appeared on every major road. Digital billboards, flash slogans in endless loops. Stay safe, stay indoors, trust the cure. At night, drones patrolled the sky, scanning for curfew violators. Their floodlights roamed empty streets like searching eyes. Any straying figure would be illuminated, arrested, questioned, sometimes never seen again. Social media became a wasteland of scripted positivity. Posts praising the government flooded every feed. Anything critical vanished within minutes, flagged as dangerous, extremist, or misinformation. Entire accounts were wiped. Those who complied were rewarded. Vaccinated citizens could dine at reopened restaurants, shop in sanitized malls, attend sanitized theaters. But something was missing, something vital and human. Conversations were quieter, smiles more rehearsed. No one asked the wrong questions anymore. Privacy was a concept of the past. The new normal demanded transparency, face scans, voice logs, thoughtless agreement. And somehow, almost no one resisted. It was like the entire population had been sedated, not with pills, but with something worse. Inside government halls, Director Vance Haler stood as a beacon of order. Every broadcast hailed him as a savior. He saved millions, the anchors said. He ended the chaos. He preserved the nation. Polls, always on state-controlled networks, showed overwhelming support. But Silas knew the truth. The chaos hadn't ended. It had simply been buried under the silence. And silence, Silas now, understood could be manufactured. Not a single news anchor mentioned the billions in profits raked in by corporate donors. There was no word on the hidden modifications quietly added to the Unity serum either. The public narrative was sanitized, repackaged, and broadcast on loop. Silas could feel the lie tightening around him like a noose. Every day at the Bureau, it became harder to conceal the turmoil beneath his professional mask. He passed colleagues in the hallway, people he'd once shared drinks and inside jokes with. Now they wore eerily calm expressions, robotic smiles and unwavering praise for Director Haylor. Some of them, the more cheerful ones, seemed almost blank. Their eyes didn't quite meet his anymore. Could the serum be responsible? One afternoon, he tested the waters with a harmless-sounding comment. You ever wonder why the lockdown got so aggressive? I mean, it ramped up fast, even before the outbreak hit its peak. His co-worker, a data analyst named Rock, paused. For a second, his expression flickered, almost like a glitch. His eyes dulled, and then he gave a vacant shrug. Doesn't matter. Halor keeps us safe. Then he turned and walked away, whistling some upbeat tune like nothing was wrong. Silas stood frozen. That short interaction told him more than weeks of digging through encrypted files. Something was happening, something that altered thought patterns, rewired reasoning, Hayler's master plan wasn't theory anymore. It was unfolding right in front of him. The virus had been the perfect storm. Create panic, flood the system with surveillance tech, inject the population with a cure that dulled dissent. And the BFI wasn't just involved. They were in on it. He could stay silent, do nothing, let it all happen, or he could take the risk and try to blow it wide open. That night, he found a sealed envelope slipped beneath his apartment door. No markings, no return address. Inside was a single typed line. "This is bigger than you think. They see all." At the bottom was a strange symbol, a circle with a diagonal slash, like a stylized zero. Silas had only seen it once before, buried in a redacted file about a resistance network. If they were reaching out to him, it meant they were watching. Maybe they believed he could be turned, or maybe they thought he already had. His pulse thundered in his ears. Everything was spiraling. His allegiance to the Bureau, his own conscience, the serum, the silence, the sickness in the system. It all pressed down on him like crushing weight. He powered up his laptop, hands trembling. A notification blinked in his BFI inbox. New assignment, subversive tracking required. The target? Someone flagged for trafficking unauthorized medical supplies. His blood ran cold when he saw the name. It matched a contact in Dr. Liana Suresh's private notes, a known whistleblower. Silas realized with a jolt they were closing in. On him, on the truth. Another breadcrumb in a trail that could soon be traced right back to his door. He slammed the laptop shut. Outside, rain had begun to fall, glinting under streetlights like broken glass. Storm clouds hunched low over the city, casting everything in a bruised purple haze. He watched from the window, the lights of the capital glowing faintly in the distance. An empire built on control, bathed in artificial calm. If he waited any longer, it would be too late. The roots of the plan were already planted deep. A few days later, Silas stood on a rise overlooking Old Glendale. It used to be a bustling suburb. Now it was a containment zone. Officially, but everyone else called it what it was, a human dumping ground. The people here were unvaccinated, refugees in their own city. Families huddled in crumbling buildings with no power, barely any running water. Trash piled up on corners. Children wandered barefoot, hollow-eyed. Armed patrols in black armor marched through at random intervals, unity enforcement units, scanning for forged immunity papers, hidden infants, anyone who might have slipped through the system. Silas clenched his fists in his coat pockets. He could barely breathe. That envelope with the strange symbol, it had changed everything. He'd used the encrypted contact link embedded in its metadata, a backdoor known only to a few. Through that, he arranged a meeting with someone calling themselves Sparrow. The rendezvous point was an old print shop down in the industrial quarter, long since boarded up and forgotten. Rumour had it the place used to run underground newspapers during the early crackdown years. Perfect for a group like this. Silas took every precaution, looped through back alleys, passed through crowded transit stations, took off his smartwatch and wore a grey hooded coat with a respirator mask to hide half his face. He stopped twice to check for tails, but the skies were clear, no drones, no watchers. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and stale ink. Stacks of yellowing paper leaned against rusting machines. Faded posters peeled from the walls, whispers from a freer time. The overhead lights barely worked, throwing broken shadows across the floor. In the corner stood a figure in dark layers, face wrapped in a black scarf. Their voice was low, direct. "You're late." Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Had to shake a drone. Sparrow gave a small nod, then motioned for him to follow. They passed through a side door into a dim, windowless room. The hum of an old generator filled the space. Wires crisscrossed the floor like veins, feeding into a battered laptop set up on a folding table. Around it stood half a dozen others, each one masked, clad in dark coats and ragged gear. Some had modified goggles. One wore fingerless gloves and carried what looked like a pulse scanner, jury-rigged from medical parts. Silas looked around at the silent group. No one spoke. The air was thick with quiet intensity. Here were the people who refused sedation, the ones who still questioned, still resisted, and now he was one of them. They introduced themselves with code names: Rook, Nightshade, Sahara, a clandestine cell of journalists, medics, and rogue programmers, all united by one cause: fighting back against the government's tightening grip on truth and freedom. "I have proof," Silas said, placing Dr. Liana Suresh's files on the table. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. The virus was engineered, and the vaccine, it's not just a cure, it's a control mechanism. It manipulates behavior. The room fell silent. The weight of his words seemed to pull the air itself taut. No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, Sparrow broke the stillness. "We've suspected it for a while," they said, folding their arms. "Over the last month, we've collected first-hand accounts. People complaining of this strange mental fog after the serum. No anger, no joy, just numb. We've also heard from ex-military insiders. They say the NSB's funneling billions into next-gen surveillance gear. But we've had no hard proof." Until now. All eyes turned to Silas. He opened his palm, revealing a flash drive. "This has everything," he said. Liana's unredacted research logs, genetic drift data, internal memos, even the original Project Paragon blueprint. Sparrow plugged it into the battered laptop. Fingers tapped quickly across the keyboard. One by one, the team gathered around as lines of raw data spilled across the screen. "It checks out," Sahara muttered. "This is real." Excitement and dread crackled in the air. "We'll need to go global with this," said Rook, a wiry man with sharp features and wire-rimmed glasses. "Not just post it online, they'll wipe it before it gains traction. Every social media outlet, every major server, they're watching." Nightshade tapped a map pinned to the wall. "There's an old shortwave radio tower up in the Sierra. Mountains, abandoned for decades. If we can modify the transmission hardware, we can piggyback onto a civilian comms satellite and broadcast the files. Thousands of independent radio operators will pick it up within minutes, and they'll mirror it before the NSB can pull the plug." Silas studied the map, then turned to the group. "But that region's crawling with patrols." "That's why we need you," Sparrow said. "You know the BFI's protocols, backdoor clearance codes, safe paths. We can't pull this off without your help." Silas didn't answer immediately. 1,000 thoughts ricocheted through his head. Faces of old friends, his parents, the weight of years spent in quiet complicity. Then, finally, he exhaled. "I'm in." The plan came together quickly. Step 1. Contact Dr. Liana Suresh again, this time to go public. Only her voice could legitimize the data. Step 2. Evade the BFI dragnet. Silas was now officially on the government's internal most wanted list. The agency had escalated its manhunt, and his name sat near the top. Step 3. Drive across the country using backroads and underground routes. Swap out vehicles at each leg, forge new IDs. Leave no digital trail. Step 4. Infiltrate the radio tower. Override the system and transmit the truth before the NSB could stop them. It sounded impossible, and yet it was their only shot. The following morning, before the sun had risen, Silas slipped out of the BFI building for the last time. No goodbyes, no trace. He burned every item that could tie him to his old life. Photos, notes, IDs. All that remained was a go bag, false documents, extra ammunition, a sidearm, medical kits, and the encrypted flash drive. He met the resistance team in a shadowed alley. They climbed into a dented cargo van with no plates and slipped into the night, like ghosts. They reached Liana's hideout 2 days later. She greeted them in a panic. Her hands shook, and her eyes darted constantly. "One of my colleagues was found dead," she whispered. "They're calling it VX73 complications. But I know what it really was. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. We're not here to hide anymore. We're here to finish this. After hearing the plan, she hesitated, but only for a moment. I'll come, she said. I won't let them bury the truth. The journey began in earnest. They moved at night, taking desolate roads no one used anymore. They hid in abandoned barns and shuttered motels during the day, always on edge, always listening. Every screen they passed showed Silas's face under the word treason. One by one, their safe houses fell. People they trusted disappeared. The media called it a series of exposure incidents. But the team knew better. The government was silencing anyone who dared speak up. Then came the ambush. Rain fell hard, soaking the ravine road they were crossing. The van's headlights cut through the mist, but they never saw the spike strip. The vehicle jolted violently, tires shredded. Silas hit the ground first, reaching for his weapon, but the air exploded with light and sound. A black-clad special. Ops team descended from the hills, shouting commands, their weapons trained with precision. Flashbangs cracked through the air like thunder. 3 of Silas's team didn't make it. Rook was shot while trying to pull Sahara from the wreck. Nightshade went down beside the van, clutching a radio device they'd spent days rigging. Blood soaked into the mud, washing downstream. Silas and the others scrambled into the woods, bullets chewing through trees behind them. The rain masked their movements, gave them precious seconds. It was enough. By the time they reached a hidden cabin miles away, soaked and half frozen, only 4 of them remained. Silas, Sparrow, Leanna, and a young tech specialist named Finch. They lit no fire. They barely spoke. But in the dim corner of that cabin, Silas looked at the flash drive still in his pocket, miraculously intact, and knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The rain came down in heavy, icy sheets, turning the ground to blackened mud. Gunfire cracked through the chaos. Sahara and Nightshade were hit first, cut down where they stood. Rook followed moments later, his body collapsing into the muck with a lifeless thud. Silas, Sparrow, and Dr. Leanna Sesh ran, hearts pounding, soaked to the bone, their minds barely processing the horror behind them. They didn't have time to mourn. There was no luxury for grief anymore. By nightfall, the 3 found shelter in a small, off-grid cabin tucked deep in the woods. A forgotten place owned by a reclusive doctor who still believed in the old world and had once taken an oath to help people, no matter the cost. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from a fire hastily built in the hearth. They patched each other up in silence, torn clothing, bruised ribs, a bullet graze on Silas's leg. Blood dried on their skin. No one spoke until the quiet became unbearable. They died believing in something real, Leanna whispered. Her voice cracked as she sat hunched near the fire, her hands trembling as she clutched the old field dressing. We can't let their deaths mean nothing. Outside, the wind howled through the pines like a mourning chorus. The forest creaked and moaned in the storm, like it too felt the weight of a world unraveling. Silas sat apart from the others, his eyes locked on the flickering lantern. Its pale glow danced against the log walls. In his mind, one question spun in an endless loop. Can we even win this? Can 3 people really change anything anymore? But the answer, if it existed, didn't matter. The only choice was to keep going, or let tyranny swallow everything. When dawn came, grey, bitter and cold, they packed what they could. Their destination was the Sierra Mountains, where an abandoned analog radio tower still clung to life on emergency power. It was their last shot. Break in, override the signal systems, and broadcast the unredacted Project Paragon files to every open frequency they could find. Even a minute of airtime might be enough to shatter the illusion, enough to spark a chain reaction of truth across a world suffocating under lies. They all knew it was a long shot, but it was all they had. Unbeknownst to them, Silas's escape weeks ago had forced NSB Director Vance Haler to activate the silence protocol. It was a cold, clinical phrase, one that masked the brutality behind it. The directive allowed lethal force against anyone suspected of spreading destabilizing misinformation. The pretext was familiar: public safety, national unity, the illusion of control. That morning, the National Stabilization Bureau seized every major media outlet across the state. Silas caught a glimpse of the broadcast through a stolen feed. Haylor stood stiffly behind a podium, flanked by grim-faced security officers in grey uniforms. His voice was flat, polished, like he'd practiced every word in front of a mirror. "We are at war against a virus," he said. "Not only biological, but ideological." He paused for effect. The camera panned slightly to reveal the NSB's new insignia, a black eagle, wings spread wide, clenching a syringe in one talon and a shield in the other. "We cannot allow a fringe group of anarchists to undermine our unified response. This new protocol is for the safety of all citizens." Silas clicked off the feed, jaw clenched. They were done hiding, and the NSB was done pretending. They left the cabin just after sunrise, moving fast and quiet. Sticking to Forest Service, trails and forgotten backroads, they steered clear of major routes where drones patrolled and checkpoints had been set up. Some towns they passed were eerily silent. Shuttered homes with boarded windows, mail piling up on doorsteps, a lingering smell of decay. The people inside had either given up or been taken. Storm clouds loomed above, thick and low, casting the landscape in a sickly grey hue. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Midway through the journey, they hit an unmanned checkpoint, just a metal barrier and a squat automated turret mounted on a rusting pole. The scanner beeped as they approached, searching for vehicle. Transponders linked to vaccine clearance IDs. Their stolen truck didn't carry one. The turret activated in a blink, muzzle whirring, bullets tearing through the windshield. Glass exploded inward. "Out! Now!" Silas shouted. They bolted from the truck and dove into the underbrush. Sparrow took a bullet to the shoulder but kept moving. They circled behind the turret, Liana dragging a screwdriver and a small hacking unit from her bag. She jammed the connector into the exposed panel and worked fast. Fingers shaking, teeth gritted, a few sparks flew, and then the turret powered down with a heavy click. They didn't speak, just breathed, ragged, adrenaline-soaked gasps, and kept moving on foot, slipping deeper into the forest's gnarled embrace. By dusk, their boots squelched through wet leaves and moss as they finally glimpsed their destination. The tower loomed on the ridge like a rusted sentinel. Its steel frame pierced the clouds, jagged and skeletal, surrounded by a tall chain-link fence topped with cruel coils of razor wire. Beyond that, floodlights glared down from poles, sweeping, the grounds in rhythmic arcs. "There it is," Sparrow murmured, holding a blood-soaked rag to his shoulder. They ducked behind a large moss-covered boulder, peering out. "This was supposed to be abandoned," Liana whispered, "but it wasn't. Not anymore." Black SUVs were parked near the gate. A guard post bristled with sensors. They counted at least 3 drones circling overhead, silent, predatory. The windows of the control room glowed yellow from within. Silas narrowed his eyes. "They're already here." Of course they were. The NSB or the BFI, maybe both, had predicted this move. This wasn't just an old tower anymore. It was a battlefield. One way or another, everything ended here. They knew it the moment they crested the ridge. They'd walked into a trap. Floodlights flicked on across the compound, and distant drone motors buzzed louder, dipping in a slow, circling pattern. Sparrow's face, half hidden beneath his weather-worn hood, remained unreadable. "We can't walk away now," he said, his voice low but steady. "We won't get another chance." Liana swallowed hard, hands trembling at her sides. "I can handle the internal systems. Just keep them off me long enough to push the transmission through." Her voice shook, but her eyes were fierce. "I can do this." Silas didn't speak right away. He felt the weight of everyone who hadn't made it, their faces, their voices, their sacrifices. Sahara, Nightshade, Rook, they were gone. But this moment was why they'd fought. "Let's finish it," he said finally, and chambered around in his sidearm. Timing was everything. They studied the drone's patterns and slipped forward during a narrow blind spot, climbing a jagged rock face that let them drop down just behind the fence. At the top, Sparrow pulled out a pair of wire cutters and clipped through the chain link barrier. The second the wire parted, an alarm screamed through the night. Sharp, mechanical, blaring. Flashlights bobbed in the dark and shouted orders, rose like thunder. "No turning back now," Silas hissed. They ran. Bullets sang past them, sparking against steel beams as the guard post opened fire. Heartbeats became war drums in their chests. Liana veered toward the rear entrance of the tower, ducking low as a round grazed a metal beam inches above her head. She dove beneath a halfway closed security shutter and disappeared inside. Silas returned fire, fast, suppressive bursts. He wasn't aiming to kill, just to buy seconds. One guard went down, screaming. Others took cover behind sandbags. Inside, Liana sprinted down a dim hallway lined with frayed wiring and flaking paint. Emergency lights blinked overhead like dying stars. At the far end, the control room stood, humming faintly. She threw herself, at the console, hands flying across the keyboard. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she inserted the flash drive and began to override the system locks. Outside the door, Sparrow covered the entrance, pistol drawn, his body tensed with every echo in the corridor. Then, gunfire. Sudden, violent. A burst from down the hall. Sparrow returned fire, forcing the attackers to hesitate, just as Silas stumbled in, blood dripping from a deep graze along his ribs. He slammed the door shut behind him and shoved a broken chair beneath the handle. "Liana," he panted. "How close?" "Uploading now," she said, her voice sharp with focus. Her fingers never stopped moving. "Transferring everything to the shortwave frequencies. It's going out to ham radio operators globally. They'll spread it, replicate it across networks. They won't be able to contain it." The speakers hissed, static and pops, a strange hum building in the background. Then, boom! The door exploded off its hinges, crashing inward. BFI soldiers stormed in, black armor gleaming, rifles raised. Sparrow fired 2 quick shots before he was slammed to the ground. The room lit up with muzzle flashes. Smoke filled the air. Through the haze stepped Director Vance Haler. His expression was cold, calculated. Behind him, agents fanned out, weapons drawn. Haler's eyes found Silas immediately. "UE. Should have stayed loyal, Rock," he said, almost gently. He raised his sidearm. "Look at this chaos. All for what? Lies? You think you're saving them from fear? Fear is what keeps society together. Without it, we have anarchy." Liana, barely standing, let out a cry. "Transmission at 90%. She reached for the console. One last keystroke. It clicked into place. Then a shot rang out. Liana jerked as the bullet tore through her chest. She crumpled, blood spreading fast across her jacket. She gasped, choking, eyes wide and unfocused. "No!" Silas shouted, rage igniting through his pain. He raised his weapon, but a second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the floor. Blood gushed from the wound. The world tilted sideways. Through the blur, he saw Halor approach, weapons still raised. Soldiers pinned Silas down. A boot pressed against the back of his neck. A rifle muzzle touched his temple. And then he saw it. A cross. The console, blinking in brilliant green. Transmission complete. It was done. The truth was out. Somewhere, someone was already watching, reading, sharing. The system was breached. Silas smiled through the blood. A small, defiant smile. He turned his head just enough to see Liana's eyes fluttering shut, a faint tremble still in her limbs. It wasn't enough. It might never be enough. but it was something. Then, bang! Everything went dark. Morning rose over a fractured world. In newsrooms and server farms, on dusty radio rigs and secure networks, a new file had appeared. Mysterious, sudden, untraceable. Labeled Project Paragon. Inside, blueprints, memos, emails, charts showing infection patterns of the VX73 virus, detailed evidence of behavioral modifications built into the so-called Unity serum, connections between pharmaceutical contracts, government officials, military experiments. The truth spilled like blood on clean floors. For a few hours the world gasped. Independent stations aired the files. Citizen journalists pieced together timelines. Social media ignited. Shock, fury, disbelief. Hashtags trended. Footage went viral. People demanded answers. But the response came fast, brutal. Government spokespeople flooded the airwaves, calling the files fakes, declaring them tools of a foreign disinformation campaign. Official accounts flagged the uploads. Algorithms buried the content under a wave of entertainment, scandals, and fear-mongering. Yet somewhere out there, in basements, forests, and resistance chat rooms, people had seen enough. The silence had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The wall, one missed during the latest curriculum purge. It showed an old, weathered symbol, a broken chain under a rising sun, the words barely legible beneath it. Truth is resistance. Elias didn't fully understand it. He was only 9. But something about that image made him pause. It didn't shine like the new NSB posters. It wasn't slick or perfect. It looked human, real. The teacher's voice continued, smooth and practiced. Director Halor's silence protocols protect our communities from fear and confusion. Trust in the process ensures safety for all. Outside the classroom, the world spun on, tidy on the surface, decaying underneath. When the Project Paragon files first hit the public feed, the chaos was immediate and unsustainable. Within hours, major media outlets across every platform denounced them as AI-generated disinformation, a product of hostile actors seeking to destabilize the nation. Sleek news anchors, their expressions carefully curated, appeared in synchronized broadcasts calling the leak a coordinated misinformation campaign designed to sabotage public health efforts. Fact-checkers, many of them affiliated with the very corporations implicated in the documents, released rapid response debunk articles. They pointed to metadata inconsistencies, unverifiable sources, and vague timelines. What they didn't do was deny the chilling overlap between the files and reality. The NSB followed suit, branding the entire transmission a terrorist hoax. Their official statement claimed it was a desperate act by domestic radicals aiming to discredit life-saving measures and sow panic. The narrative spread like wildfire. Even as a few truth-seekers tried to archive the files, links vanished. Uploads were blocked. Entire accounts disappeared. Director Halor, ever the reassuring voice of national unity, made a primetime appearance. He stood before the nation, surrounded by uniformed agents, his voice calm and fatherly. Yes, the virus is real. Of course it is, he said, carefully emphasizing each word. And yes, the vaccine is our only hope. What we face is not only biological, it is ideological. People like Silas Rock have weaponized fear to create confusion, to tear down everything. We've built together, behind him, screens flashed an image of Silas, unsmiling, eyes sunken from months of hiding. Next to his face, bold white text read, "He lied to protect you." It was masterful. With those 5 words, Halor twisted the truth into a warning. Silas wasn't a martyr. He was a manipulator. The files, fakes, delusions, dangerous heresy. By nightfall, Project Paragon had been scrubbed from the visible internet. Algorithms buried keywords. Accounts that dared to repost were locked or suspended under vague violations. On TV, news anchors repeated the same line with eerie unity. The single source of truth is the NSB, and the public, anxious, medicated, exhausted, nodded along. Compliance was chemically reinforced. The Unity serum's newest iteration, Unity Plus, rolled out within weeks. It promised even more reliable mood stabilization and neuroimmune balance. New mandates required that children receive it by age 5. Immunization vans lined schoolyards. Surveillance tech grew rampant. Biometric scanners appeared in grocery stores, banks, subways. A palm scan to buy apples. A retina check to ride the Hamas bus. No ID, no access. Protests flared in isolated cities, but they were swiftly crushed. Drone swarms released gas into crowds. Curfews were enforced with automated announcements and invisible fences. Yet something refused to die. In hidden forums, the files lived on, copy after copy encrypted and passed like digital samizdat. Underground servers hosted grainy videos of scientists whispering warnings, fragmented emails, memos that bore signatures of real people, disappeared people. A few rogue journalists, old school, analog, attempted to verify and broadcast the findings. One hosted a live stream with a retired virologist who'd helped test the first vaccine trial. The man described patients who stopped laughing, children who forgot their parents, adults who obeyed without question. The stream cut mid-sentence. Within an hour, his house burned down. Bots flooded the internet, shouting fake, fake, fake in every comment section, every post. No one could tell what was real anymore. In a quiet suburb, a black NSB vehicle pulled into a driveway. A solemn woman in uniform stepped out, black armband tightly wrapped around her sleeve. She walked to the door of a modest home and rang the bell. Silas Rock's mother opened it. The woman didn't cry. She'd expected this. The officer extended a folded flag. "Your son died during a domestic terrorism incident," she said. No mention of a bullet to the head. No mention of Director Haylor standing over him. No mention of Liana Sesh, her body found curled and broken beside the radio tower. Just a line in an internal log. Silas Rock, deceased, enemy of the state. And that was it. The world didn't stop. It never does. News cycled to new variants. Of the virus to threats of foreign sabotage, to celebrities pledging allegiance to safety. Unity Plus was rebranded again. Unity Absolute. Its logo, an endless loop, soft blue and silver, appeared on packaging, posters, even cereal boxes. Parents lined up to inject their kids without question. "It's for their safety," they said. And still, flickers of rebellion smoldered beneath the surface. In encrypted chat rooms, whispers passed. "Did you see the files before they disappeared? Did your brother stop speaking after the booster? Did your mum forget your name?" No answers, just stories. Back in the classroom, Elias stared at the peeling poster behind the teacher's desk. "Truth is resistance." The teacher tapped the screen again. "Repeat after me, class. Order through unity, safety through silence. Order through unity. Safety through silence," the children chanted, voices flat. But Elias hesitated. He looked down at his desk, where he'd scratched something earlier with the corner of a coin. A word he didn't fully understand, but felt deeply. Why? And, in that tiny defiance, in a whisper that echoed only in his heart, resistance lived on. The far wall held a faded public safety bulletin featuring the stern face of Silas Rock. The words, "He lied to protect you," were stenciled across it in bold, unforgiving red. For reasons Elias couldn't quite articulate, a quiet curiosity stirred within him. Who was Silas Rock, really? Why did the man's eyes, framed by accusation, still look so resolute, so alive? The teacher never spoke his name except to recite the official doctrine. He sowed confusion. He endangered unity. Yet Elias couldn't, shake the feeling that there was more. Something hidden, something deliberately buried. He blinked, shifting in his seat as the teacher droned on about national heroes and the virtues of obedience. Outside the window, the sun traced slow arcs. Over a row of silent drones gliding overhead, the hush of compliance blanketed the world, broken only by the faintest ghost-like echoes. Echoes of those who had once dared to cry out for truth. Did Silas Rock really lie? Or had he spoken a truth too dangerous to be heard? At recess, while the other children queued for their biometric scans, Elias lingered alone near a ragged patch of grass, letting sunlight warm his face. The wind whispered across the playground, brushing his ears with a question no one dared ask. He closed his eyes. For a fleeting moment, he imagined a different world, one shaped by knowledge instead of fear, by connection instead of silence. But the vision dissolved. A safety officer called his name. A scanner beeped as it read the code on his wristband, and the moment was gone. Far away, buried in the cold stillness of a government archive warehouse, a battered cardboard box sat forgotten on a shelf. Its label read, SR, confiscated personal effects, do not process. Inside, an encrypted data drive lay untouched. No official had ever bothered to open it. Within that drive slept the echoes of a man's final stand, a legacy forged in conviction, in sacrifice, in the unshakable belief that people deserved to know the truth about VX-73 and the true purpose of Unity Serum. And perhaps, just perhaps, those echoes might still awaken. Years later, in the crumbling silence of a shuttered radio station, high in the mountains, a teenage boy stumbled upon a dusty crate marked with faded letters. Inside, an old laptop, scribbled notes on yellowed paper, a flickering hope. He powered up the machine, surprised to find it still functional, its battery humming faintly from a rusted generator nearby. A video file blinked onto the cracked screen. The face of Silas Rock appeared, older than the posters, worn and tired, yet defiant. His eyes still burned with something fierce. The recording flickered, grainy with static. I'm not sure if you'll ever see this, but if you do, then you know. The official story about VX-73 and Unity Serum, it was a lie. We tried to warn the world. This wasn't about curing a pandemic. It was about control, about tightening the grip on every part of human life. And if you've found this, maybe you're willing to stand up where we fell. A burst of distortion garbled the next few seconds, then, quiet now. You were never supposed to know. But now that you do, what will you choose? The screen froze on Silas's face, calm, unblinking, eternal. Outside, the wind howled against the mountain pass, a raw, mournful sound echoing through the trees like a forgotten song. Clutching the handwritten notes, the teenager took a trembling breath. He felt the weight of the moment press into his chest. This wasn't just a relic. This was a call. He looked down at the crate. A peeling label read, Project Paragon Files. The words lit a spark in his mind, a fragile flame flickering against the darkness of a world taught to forget. And in his eyes, for the first time in a generation, hope burned.